Chapter 3603. Xiao Hua watched Reverend Xiangtian disappear with a cold smile on his face. Looking at the ocelot, he knew that Reverend Xiangtian might not give up on killing him. Now that Reverend Xiangtian saw that Xiao Hua had come to help him, he didn't know the situation, and was avoiding him for the time being. Fellow Daoist Xiao, what's going on? Reverend Yuan Qing landed on the ground, and the two-headed monster shrank down to only a few feet long. It coiled around Reverend Yuan Qing's arm, and its four eyes flashed with a dark green light as it stared fixedly at Little Silver in Xiao Hua's hand. But at that moment, Little Silver wasn't afraid at all. He wrapped his paws around his mouth and licked his little tongue before rubbing his face protectively a few times, as if he was washing his face. The most ridiculous thing was that after washing his face, Little Silver actually stood up and cupped his hands elegantly at immortal Yuan Qing, as if he were a little person. Ha ha ha. Reverend Yuan Qing naturally knew what his pet was thinking. Seeing Little Silver like this, he laughed heartily and hit the two-headed monster on the forehead with his palm, shouting, "Evil creature, if you dare do that again, I'll pull out your tendons and skin you alive." Awoo! The two-headed monster gave a low howl, looking very aggrieved. It shrank down again and hid its head behind Reverend Yuan Qing, not daring to look at Little Silver again. Xiao Hua smiled slightly and rubbed Little Silver's head with his finger. He looked at Reverend Yuan Qing and said, "What else could it be? This so-called Reverend Xiangtian just wants to attack me." Oh! His Reverend Xiangtian? Reverend Yuan Qing was blank for a moment before a strange expression appeared on his face. He looked meaningfully in the direction where Reverend Xiangtian had disappeared, as if he had already heard of this Reverend Xiangtian. Xiao Hua was blank for a moment before he rubbed his chin and smiled. "Oh, fellow Daoist Yuan Qing, do you know this guy?" "This guy?" Reverend Yuan Qing didn't know whether to laugh or cry. This is a nascent soul cultivator, but fellow Daoist Xiao actually calls him this guy. You really don't take a Daoist nascent soul cultivator seriously. Whether it's a golden core cultivator or a nascent soul cultivator, I respect all righteous people. For a thief who covets this Xiao's wealth, this Xiao called him a bastard is already enough. Xiao Hua said with a deadpan expression. What if we tie up a late nascent soul stage cultivator? This late nascent soul stage cultivator regards this middle nascent soul stage cultivator as the apple of his eye. Reverend Yuanqing's words carried a hint of ridicule. Xiao Hua blinked his eyes. Thinking about Daoist Master Xiangtian's big and burly appearance, in any case, she had nothing to do with Daoist Master Yuan Qing's beloved daughter. Daoist Yuan Qing looks at Xiao Hua's somewhat dazed expression and seems to understand something. He says with a low laugh, "It seems that Daoist Xiao really hasn't heard the story of Daoist Xiongtian and Fairy Xiongfeng." Xiao Hua shook his head. This Xiao has indeed never heard of it. However, if a pair of Golden Boy and Jade Girl cultivated to the nascent soul stage at the same time, then in my hidden immortal continent, it can be considered a beautiful story. Phut! Immortal Yuan Qing almost burst out laughing. He lowered his voice and said, "They can't be called a golden couple, but a golden couple. Golden Boy and Jade Boy." Xiao Hua was rather astonished. He did not seem to understand what Reverend Yuan Qing was talking about. Daoist Yuan Qing laughs loudly. He pats the two-headed monster with his hand and yells, "Evil creature, quickly leave. Don't listen to some corner." Roar. The two-headed monster roars loudly and flies towards the place where Daoist Xiongtian fell. Daoist Yuan Qing says to Xiao Hua with a smile, "Daoist Xiao, let's go in first. We'll talk as we walk." Xiao Hua asks curiously, "Didn't fellow Daoist Yuan Qing make an appointment with Hong Songzi and Hai Hongzi? Why did you come here yourself? Aren't you going to look for those two first?" "We did have an agreement. Moreover, the three of us also have a magic tool to communicate with each other. However, this magic tool can only respond within 100 miles. I have already searched several places but did not find any trace of those two. Now that we have met Daoist Xiao and the trace of a rare treasure, we naturally have to look for the rare treasure first. Actually, when I saw fellow Daoist, I already wanted to join hands with fellow Daoist. Unfortunately, Hai Hongzi did not agree and I had no other choice. Now, it seems that I still have fate with fellow Daoist Xiao. Xiao Hua nods and says, since that's the case, it's fine. This Xiao is aiming for the Imperial Preceptor's fortune while fellow Daoist Yuan Qing is aiming for the rare treasure. We don't conflict with each other and can cooperate. That's right, that's right. Daoist Yuan Qing glances at the place where the two-headed monster disappeared and says, this defensive formation seems to be closing. Let's go in first. I also want to tell fellow Daoist the story of Fairy Xiongfeng and Daoist Xiongtian. Good. Xiao Hua says with a smile, fellow Daoist Yuan Qing, please go in first. Daoist Yuan Qing does not hold back. Since the two-headed monster did not give any warning, the entrance of the defensive formation was naturally not dangerous. He moves his body and enters the wind tunnel. At the same time, he tells Xiao Hua the story of Fairy Xiongfeng and Daoist Xiongtian in a low voice. Daoist Yuan Qing does not want to talk about it, but when he does, Xiao Hua feels disgusted. After all, Fairy Xiongfeng is not a real fairy but a male cultivator. However, she likes men and thinks of herself as a fairy, so she calls herself Fairy Xiongfeng after reaching the nascent soul stage. This Daoist Xiongtian is naturally Fairy Xiongfeng's exclusive property. Fairy Xiongfeng likes Daoist Xiongtian very much and uses all kinds of methods and elixirs to help Daoist Xiongtian reach the nascent soul stage. Under Fairy Xiongfeng's connivance, Daoist Xiongtian naturally does not look in anyone's eyes and can take whatever he wants. Others are afraid of Fairy Xiongfeng's power and can only be angry but do not dare to say anything. Damn it. Xiao Hua follows Daoist Yuan Qing into the formation and sees fog everywhere. Not only is he unable to see far with his naked eyes, even his spiritual sense feels like it is being corroded. He swings his arm as if to drive the fog away and says, how can there be such a person in this world? It's simply filthy to the extreme. This Xiao is covered in goosebumps just listening to it. Hee hee. Daoist Yuan Qing says with a smile, there are countless strange people in this world, it's just that we don't know about them. You don't even know how ruthless Fairy Xiongfeng's methods are. No cultivator who falls into Fairy Xiongfeng's hands can come out alive. Even people who hear about his methods are disgusting. No one wants to offend him, and no one wants to fall into his hand. Oh, why is that? Xiao Hua, of course, knows that Daoist Yuan Qing has not finished his words, so he asks hurriedly. Daoist Yuan Qing says, actually, Fairy Xiongfeng is also a pitiful person. Although he is very intelligent since he was a child, his fate is full of misfortunes. Before he became a baby, he encountered many disasters. As for what kind of disaster he encountered, it's impossible to know now. Because all the people related to him were killed by him after he became a baby, I'm afraid it's because of his previous experience that he has such a strange hobby. This. Xiao Hua shakes his head slightly. This person's temperament, I'm afraid, is already twisted, raw. Just as Xiao Hua is speaking telepathically, he suddenly hears an angry roar. Daoist Yuan Qing's expression changes drastically when he hears it, and an embarrassed and angry voice bursts out from the bottom of his tongue. Which blind little bastard dares to bully my Sai Hong? Saying this, Daoist Yuan Qing doesn't have time to greet Xiao Hua, and his figure turns into a rainbow as he rushes in the direction of the monster Sai Hong's angry roar. However, Reverend Yuan Qing was truly infuriated. His entire body was flashing with a dark green brilliance. Wherever the rainbow touched, the dense fog would be pushed away. Moreover, the dense fog within a radius of a few feet to the left was frozen into wisps of sparkling and translucent fog, which then fell to the ground. Xiao Hua looks at Daoist Yuan Qing's back and then at the icy fog, and a look of understanding flashes in his eyes. Since Daoist Yuan Qing's target isn't the Imperial Preceptor's lot, then it must be the cold ghost Gaul. Roar roar. Daoist Yuan Qing's figure disappears, and a series of roars can be heard in the distance. Although these sounds are very similar, Xiao Hua can clearly hear that they are the cries of the ocelot and Sai Hong. At that moment, Little Silver, who is curled up in Xiao Hua's palm, suddenly stands up. He looks extremely excited, and points his little paw in front of him, urging Xiao Hua to speed up. Xiao Hua smiles slightly. His figure also sways, and he turns into a golden rainbow as he chases after Daoist Yuan Qing. The distance between them is no less than several li. Before Xiao Hua can pass through the thick fog, roars can be heard one after another, and the thick fog surges even more. Xiao Hua doesn't need to release his soul sense to know that a fierce battle is taking place up ahead. Sure enough, Xiao Hua flew to a place where the fog was slightly thinner. Reverend Yuan Qing was holding a small halberd that was about a foot long. His body flashed with an intense light, and his eyes were slightly red. He was vigilantly looking in front of him. On the other side of Reverend Yuan Qing was Reverend Shangtian. Reverend Shangtian had a look of contempt on his face. He didn't bring out any magic treasures, and he didn't even look at Reverend Yuan Qing. His gaze was fixed on the space between the two of them. Sai Hong, who had taken out the two-headed monster, was fighting the ocelot. The ocelot is clearly more agile than Sai Hong, and is also much more powerful. In the short time that Xiao Hua disappeared, the ocelot has already bitten several wounds on Sai Hong's back. Thick blue blood seeped out from the wounds. While Sai Hong was in pain, he seemed to have gone mad. His two snake-like heads roared and spat out aqua-blue venom towards the ocelot. Unfortunately, the ocelot dodged and spat out an earth-colored light from its mouth. Not only did it avoid the venom, but it also swept the venom back. Although the venom was powerful, even the surrounding fog would be corroded by the venom. However, it had no effect on the ocelot. When Xiao Hua appears, Daoist Shangtian immediately shifts his excited gaze away from the ocelot and coldly glances at Xiao Hua. Although he doesn't say anything, the warning in his eyes is obvious. "Ao!" At this time, Sai Hong's left head roars loudly. Suddenly, it grows 3 times larger and opens its mouth to bite down on the ocelot. The ocelot also roars loudly, and then actually pounces towards Sai Hong's mouth. Sai Hong was stunned for a moment, but soon after, he opened his other mouth and let out a roar. He twisted his neck in a strange manner and attacked the ocelot's tail from the bottom. -12. Chapter 3604. Hee. A strange smile appeared on Reverend Shangtian's face. He shifted his gaze away from Xiao Hua and looked at the ocelot with excitement. Although Xiao Hua didn't know how powerful the ocelot was, he knew that Sai Hong was about to suffer a great loss. Reverend Yuan Qing's face was so gloomy that it seemed like it would drip water at any moment. Sure enough, when the head above Sai Hong's head was about to pounce down at lightning speed and the sharp fangs in its mouth were revealed, the ocelot suddenly arched its back and slightly moved to the side when it was only a few feet away from Sai Hong's head. Then, the tail that had been curled up behind its back suddenly stretched out and hit Sai Hong's head with a pa sound. Sai Hong's entire body instantly moved a few feet away. Sai Hong's had only moved a few feet away from the ocelot in the time it took for a spark to fly off a piece of flint. Only the dark green poisonous fog brushed past half of the ocelot's body. Ao! Sai Hong's lower head was hit by the ocelot's tail and seemed to be a little dizzy. Sai Hong's upper head couldn't be stopped in its tracks, and with a loud bang sound, the upper head couldn't close in time and bit down on the lower head. Not only that, the ocelot, which had just dodged the attack, once again streaked across the air. As it shook its head, its body suddenly expanded, and it bit down on the neck of Sai Hong's head. In an instant, dark green blood flowed out from the wound. Sai Hong was in great pain. His entire body twisted in midair and his long tail smashed down on the ocelot with the force of a mountain. Ao! The ocelot's throat roared and its tail flashed with brilliance as it rapidly expanded. It used all its strength to bite Sai Hong's neck and used its tail to attack Sai Hong. "How dare you, evil creature!" Reverend Yuan Qing activated the small halberd in his hand. The small halberd immediately emitted a brilliant light and a python-like shadow emerged from the runes on the halberd. It seemed like it would turn into a dragon and attack as soon as it left his hand. In the distance, Reverend Shangtian's face turned dark red and his eyes flashed with passion. He looked up at Reverend Yuan Qing and said coldly, "Animals fight among themselves. If someone disturbs us, don't blame this old man for not treating you as a human." Reverend Yuan Qing bit his lip as if he was enduring and waiting for help, but he didn't look at Xiao Hua. At this moment, Little Silver's tail in Xiao Hua's hand was released from Xiao Hua's thumb. That little claw slightly scratched Xiao Hua's palm, as if it wanted to move. Xiao Hua's heart thumped and he flicked Little Silver's but with his middle finger. Little Silver actually immediately understood Xiao Hua's meaning. Wind stirred up under his feet as he flew in the direction of the ocelot and Sai Hong. Compared with the ocelot's and Sai Hong's imposing and Xiao Hua's body, it was pitifully small and pitifully weak. Reverend Yuan Qing's when he saw Xiao, little Yuan Qing's. Little to Shangtian, Reverend Yuan Qing. Seeing Xiao Hua make a move, Reverend Yuan Qing was reassured. He didn't think that Little Silver could do anything, but he was sure that Xiao Hua wouldn't just stand by and watch. Knowing this, Reverend Yuan Qing suddenly attacked with the small halberd in his hand. With a cold aura and a dazzling splendor, the small halberd streaked through the air. The tip of the halberd lengthened as it pierced the space between the ocelot's eyebrows. "How dare you!" Reverend Shangtian had been on guard for a long time. He roared angrily and his whole body trembled as if he was extremely excited. He opened his mouth and a flying sword turned into 10,000 winter plum blossoms and shot into the air. Seeing that the battle between the two nascent soul cultivators was about to break out, Xiao Hua put his hand on his waist as if to take out some magic treasure from his Chenkuan bag. But at that moment, Little Silver, who had already flown to the edge of the battle between the ocelot and Sai Hong, abruptly turned into a thin silver light and charged straight for the ocelot's back. He was faster than lightning, and furthermore, he didn't make the slightest sound. Xiao Hua was stunned, Reverend Yuan Qing was stunned, and Reverend Shangtian was also stunned. The magic treasures of the two nascent soul cultivators froze in midair. The ocelot was now locked in a stalemate with Sai Hong and couldn't pay too much attention to it. However, the ocelot had also sensed Little Silver's attack, and its body immediately emitted a layer of earthy yellow light. This light was surrounded by wisps of demon fog, and its brocade fur stood straight up, each strand flashed with light. Swish! It was like a stubborn stone thrown into the water, and the ripples didn't seem to have the power to resist it. Little Silver pounced on the ocelot's back. Whether it was the defensive light, the sizzling demon fog, or the brocade fur, they couldn't resist Little Silver's bite at all. Little Silver's body sank into the ocelot's back. "Awoo!" The ocelot cried out in pain. Before it could pull its mouth away from Sai Hong's neck, there was a flash of silver light in front of its chest, and Little Silver actually flew out from there. As soon as Little Silver flew out, the ocelot immediately went limp in midair. "Pah!" There was a crisp sound as Sai Hong's tail hit the ocelot's forehead. Its head was smashed to smithereens, and its entire body fell from midair. The whole process took only a few breaths. Not only was Reverend Yuan Qing in disbelief, even Xiao Hua himself felt that it was a little inconceivable. "Awoo!" Reverend Shangtian let out a roar similar to an ocelot's. The cold plum blossom flying sword shone brightly, and the pressure of a middle nascent soul cultivator soared into the sky from the top of Reverend Shangtian's head. Reverend Shangtian was furious. At that moment, Xiao Hua's unhurried and cold voice rang out. "Animals fight among themselves. If someone disturbs us, don't blame this old man for not treating them as human beings. Phut!" Seeing Reverend Shangtian's anger, Reverend Yuan Qing's heart turned cold. The small halberd magic treasure was about to rush into the air, but when he heard Xiao Hua say the exact same thing as Reverend Shangtian, he couldn't help but laugh. "You brat!" Reverend Shangtian was even more furious, and he pounced on Xiao Hua in fury. Reverend Shangtian had actually abandoned Reverend Yuan Qing and wanted to kill Xiao Hua. As soon as Reverend Shangtian's pressure was released, it immediately stirred up the clouds, and the thick fog within a radius of several hundred feet was swept away. Xiao Hua sneered, and with a flip of his hand, he was about to hit his own head. At this moment, a sudden change occurred. Rumble. The space within a radius of more than 10 miles was filled with thunderbolts, and a thick righteous qi was generated from all directions, falling towards Daoist Xiongtian. An aura akin to the might of the heavens was born from this wave of awe-inspiring qi. Not only did it envelop Reverend Shangtian, but it also enveloped Xiao Hua and Reverend Yuan Qing, as well as several tens of kilometers around them. Reverend Shangtian's pressure had triggered the restrictions of the defensive formation, but that wasn't the end of it. The thick fog within several tens of kilometers was dispersed by the awe-inspiring qi, revealing the true appearance of the defensive formation. Below Xiao Hua and the others, icy ponds appeared one after another. Icy rivers that were as thin as palm prints also appeared. The dense fog actually came from the icy ponds and icy rivers. At this moment, there were still wisps of fog rushing into the air. Following the appearance of the defensive formation was a group of cultivators scattered around the glacial ponds and glacial pond. There were at least a dozen of these cultivators, and aside from the nascent soul cultivator furthest away from Xiao Hua and the others, the rest were all gold core cultivators. These cultivators' chi was affected by the awe-inspiring chi, and they had no choice but to release their pressure and magic treasures to resist with all their might. Some of the weaker ones were even knocked to the ground by the awe-inspiring chi. The thick fog dispersed, and Xiao Hua and the others recovered their divine sense. With a sweep of their divine sense, the group of cultivators unconsciously focused their attention on a cliff at the edge of the space. They saw a ball of two-colored light flickering there, and even the divine sense of a nascent soul cultivator couldn't see it clearly. The aura of the strange treasure was coming from this ball of light. Xiao Hua and the others were some distance away from the strange treasure, but the other nascent soul cultivator wasn't too far away. Just as they discovered the strange treasure, the nascent soul cultivator's body turned into a rainbow, and he charged towards the strange treasure as fast as lightning, shattering the awe-inspiring chi along the way. Damn it! The culprit who triggered the defensive formation, Daoist Soaring Heaven, was furious and cursed. The flying sword in the air was too late to attack Xiao Hua, so it hurriedly turned around and flew towards the nascent soul cultivator like a blooming plum blossom. From the looks of it, it seemed like it wanted to snatch the strange treasure from the nascent soul cultivator. Damn it, this bastard, isn't he just courting death? Xiao Hua's palm stopped in midair, and he couldn't help but ridicule Daoist Soaring Heaven, who was almost 20% faster than the nascent soul cultivator. Daoist Yuan Qing didn't dare to put away the small halberd. He pointed his finger, and the small halberd flew back to the top of his head to protect him. Then, he waved his sleeve and put away the heavily injured two-headed monster Sai Hong. He coldly said, "Although we are mid-nascent soul cultivators, in this bastard's eyes, we are no different from early nascent soul cultivators. Not to mention the three of us, even if two more came, he would still be the same. Today, if we don't join forces to kill him, we won't be able to leave Yaotai Mountain. Even if we can avoid Daoist Soaring Heaven, we won't be able to escape Fairy Soaring Foam." Xiao Hua faintly smiled and opened his hand. The happy little silver flew back into his palm. Its claws were still digging into its mouth, as if it had eaten its fill and was cleaning its mouth. Looking at little silver's body, there wasn't the slightest bit of blood or filth. "What do you think, fellow Daoist Xiao?" Seeing the mysterious smile on Xiao Hua's face, Daoist Yuan Qing couldn't figure out what Xiao Hua was thinking. He had no choice but to get straight to the point. Daoist Soaring Heaven's ocelot was indeed killed by Sai Hong, but in the end, it was still killed by fellow Daoist's pet. "Oh, Daoist, I don't want to tie Daoist together with me. I am very happy that Daoist was able to take action at the critical moment. Since that's the case, let's kill him." Xiao Hua's expression didn't change and he didn't explain anything. Daoist Yuan Qing didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He cupped his hands and said, "Oh, Daoist Xiao, if it were that easy, would I have needed to say so much in front of you? If Daoist I really want it, then let's hurry over. This strange treasure. I don't want it anymore. I'll give it to that fellow Daoist in front of me. Of course, if Daoist wants it, then the three of us can join forces to kill him." -12. Chapter 3605. Alright, let's do as Daoist Yuan Qing says. Xiao Hua nodded. He looked very relaxed as if he was about to swat a mosquito. Daoist Yuan Qing wasn't as calm as Xiao Hua. He had heard of Fairy Xiongfeng's fame and felt that Xiao Hua was underestimating Daoist Xiongtian. He wanted to say a few more words, but when he saw that Daoist Xiongtian and that nameless nascent soul cultivator were about to approach, he didn't dare to delay. He hurriedly moved his halberd and chased after Daoist Xiongtian. When Daoist Yuan Qing chased after him, there was a strange look in his eyes. However, Daoist Yuan Qing's figure had only moved a few hundred meters when suddenly, the sound of a peeper appeared in the air. This peeper sound was very strange. It was low and deep like raindrops, falling directly into people's hearts. Soon after, the raindrops became as big as a bucket and continued to crackle. After a few breaths of time, the peeper sound suddenly became louder. It was like an eagle striking the sky, producing the sound of a golden spear. Not good. The defensive formation has been activated. Not only Xiao Hua, but all the cultivators within a few dozen kilometers were awakened by the sound of the battle. Xiao Hua was especially shocked. The true qi in his chest was stirred up by the unspeakable peeper sound. In a trance, he seemed to see iron horses roaring from the ice river. The iron horses' hooves instantly crushed the space. Golden spear iron horse. Xiao Hua calmed down and immediately stabilized his true qi. He couldn't help but think of Lung Chinga's golden spear iron horse formation. Sure enough, as the sound of the peeper reverberated through the entire space, a vast amount of awe-inspiring qi rushed into the cold pond and the ice river. Countless battle intents and cold air rushed out from the ice river. Waves of inscriptions stirred in the ice river and the cold pond. Then, pairs of war horses rushed out from the ice river and the cold pond. Sigh. Xiao Hua, who had seen the 5-brocade cloud painting before, couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air when his divine sense swept across these war horses. These war horses that were formed from ice were all soldiers and generals wearing ice armor. These soldiers and generals were surrounded by an incomparably noble and cold aura. Furthermore, the weapons in their hands seemed to be both tangible and intangible at the same time. The aura of these war horses was several times stronger than Lung Chinga's golden spear iron horse formation. Moreover, there was an endless stream of cavalry emerging from the ice river. There seemed to be no end to it. Oh no! Xiao Hua's heart skipped a beat. He couldn't help but worry for those golden core cultivators. 1 or 2 battle riders might not be able to catch the eye of a gold core cultivator, but 100 or 1,000 of them could definitely take the life of a gold core cultivator, not to mention that many of these gold core cultivators were still resisting the heavenly might of the defensive formation. Xiao Hua's worries were not superfluous. Not far from where Xiao Hua's divine sense swept past, a Jindan cultivator who was doing his utmost to resist the heavenly might of the imperial formation saw several armored horses galloping on the ice river approaching. Immediately, his entire body flashed with a splendor, and a magic weapon that looked like a silver moon spat out from his mouth. The silver moon was like a blade, and when the splendor flew past, those armored horses were instantly shattered into pieces. The charging horses turned into ice and fell to the ground. However, without waiting for this gold core cultivator to catch his breath, another dozen or so ice spears emerged from the cold pond. Before he could even see the armored horses behind the ice spears, those ice spears shot towards the gold core cultivator like meteors. The gold core cultivator's figure slightly swayed, as if his pressure was shaken by the heavenly might of the formation. Soon after, his head also shook, and it seemed as if countless armored horses had appeared before his eyes. When the ice spears approached him, that cultivator let out a loud roar. The silver moon magic weapon flashed again, and the dozen or so ice spears were easily destroyed. Even when the magic weapon rushed into the ice river, it brought with it 10,000 drops of frost, and the armored horses that were unable to charge out were also destroyed in one strike. The gold core cultivator caught his breath, and thick clouds immediately appeared beneath his feet. The clouds carried the cultivator's body and flew straight into the air. However, after flying for several meters, whoosh! Several ice spears shot out from the thick clouds beneath his feet. They very strangely stabbed towards the gold core cultivator's lower body. The gold core cultivator turned pale with fright. Only now did he understand that these weapons and armored horses could be produced from any kind of fog. Even his magic cloud technique was not spared. Fortunately, this gold core cultivator was alert enough. He had already realized that something was wrong. He hurriedly turned his body into the wind, and used the Dao Sec's flying technique to hastily dodge. Pu pu pu. Several muffled sounds rang out. Several spears were shattered, and the gold core cultivator was also pierced by 2 of the ice spears. However, the gold core cultivator's body shone with golden light. The ice spears only managed to pierce his defensive magic weapon, and they were broken again. Just as this gold core cultivator was still in shock, and his heart had just started to feel lucky, a clump of cold air once again strangely appeared a few feet in front of his head. This time, the gold core cultivator was prepared. He looked very calm. With a wave of his big sleeve, catcha catcha sounds rang out. Several Dao weapons broke on his iron-like Dao robe. Of course, there were still several ice spears that managed to slip through the net and hide outside of these relatively powerful divine abilities. The gold core cultivator's body shone with golden light again. Clearly, he wanted to block these ice spears. However, when the ice spears pierced the golden light, the gold core cultivator's complexion changed greatly. Without waiting for him to stir up his true essence again, or activate his silver moon magic weapon, one of the ice spears pierced his chest. The gold core cultivator let out a blood-curdling scream. His corporeal body floated down like a withered leaf. The ice spear that sneak attacked him just now, like the other spears and halberds, sank into the cold air and disappeared without a trace. In just a short moment, the gold core cultivator controlling the formation was suppressed, his soul suppressed, his spirit attacked, and his life was taken away. The hundreds of years of hard work he had put into cultivating turned into flowing water. A strand of wandering soul calmly disappeared. Hiss. Xiao Hua could clearly see from high up in the sky that the killing ice spear was no different from the other ice spears. His divine sense was unable to distinguish it at all. Seeing the gold core cultivator fall so easily, Xiao Hua hastily opened his transcendence vision. With one glance, he couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air. This was because within the countless mist, there were actually many immortal weapons wielding ice spears that would occasionally appear from the fog of the defensive formation. After killing a gold core cultivator with one strike, they would immediately disappear into the formation. It was as if they were dragging mud and water. It was truly incomparably mysterious. Within this defensive formation, more than half of the gold core cultivators had already fallen in a short moment. The other gold core cultivators saw that the situation was far from good and hurriedly protected themselves with all their might. At the same time, they also used Dao sect flying techniques to get closer to Daoist Master Shangtian and the other nascent soul cultivators, hoping to use this opportunity to escape. As for Daoist Master Shangtian, how could he care about these gold core cultivators? Daoist Master Shangtian's magic power surged all over his body and sword light shot out, sweeping everything in its path. All the ice spears and iron horses were cut down and unparalleled momentum rushed towards the treasure. At this moment, the nascent soul cultivators in the distance also felt Daoist Master Shangtian's killing intent. They sped up, wanting to snatch the jade box before Daoist Master Shangtian could. Of course, they didn't care about the sneak attacks of the immortal weapons around them. Damn it! Xiao Hua was inwardly annoyed by the ruthless methods of this Confucian cultivator. He cursed and urged his body to catch up to Daoist Master Yuan Qing. Xiao Hua's speed was naturally far superior to Daoist Master Yuan Qing's. Although he didn't use the lightning escape technique, he had already surpassed Daoist Master Yuan Qing in the blink of an eye. Daoist Master Yuan Qing was stunned, but a smile appeared on his face. The stronger Xiao Hua was, the better it would be for him. The two of them would have more chances to kill Daoist Master Shangtian if they joined hands. However, Daoist Master Yuan Qing was puzzled because after Xiao Hua passed him, he didn't directly attack Daoist Master Shangtian. He also didn't try to snatch the treasure. Instead, he flew down between him and Daoist Master Shangtian. Xiao Hua waved his hands and shot out a series of incantations. The space within 1,000 feet of Daoist Master Yuan Qing began to tremble rapidly. Strands of cold air were shattered and the pillars of Daoist Master Yuan Qing's qi were also destroyed. A golden light flashed and half of the golden scissors rushed into the air. Ah ah! Miserable screams sounded and several broken limbs wearing immortal armor fell into the fog in the distance. Too fierce. Daoist Master Yuan Qing was flabbergasted. As the saying goes, when an expert shows his hand, you can tell whether he is an expert or not. Although this saying was very vulgar, it was very appropriate to use it on Xiao Hua. Daoist Master Yuan Qing had overestimated Xiao Hua, but that overestimation was far from Xiao Hua's fierceness. Daoist Master Yuan Qing was well aware of the limitations the defensive formation had on Dao sect cultivators. He could easily cast the confinement of 1,000 feet outside the Yarotai mountain, but inside the defensive formation, it was already a miracle that he was able to confine a few thousand feet. Otherwise, he wouldn't have desperately chased after Daoist Master Xiangtian, and Daoist Master Xiangtian and that nameless nascent soul cultivator wouldn't have had to desperately rush to the cliff where the treasure was. Normally, a nascent soul cultivator would be able to snatch the treasure within a dozen or so miles. Even if they used a flying technique, they would be able to snatch it in the blink of an eye. Daoist Master Yuan Qing was pleasantly surprised and his expression changed once again. The magic power in Xiao Hua's body surged and the safe area that Xiao Hua's magic power restricted was constantly expanding. The golden core cultivator next to the immortal soldier who had just been killed was already at the edge of the safe area. It wasn't until now that Daoist Master Yuan Qing realized what Xiao Hua was thinking. He really didn't understand. After all, that golden core cultivator wasn't Wu Tian or Chang Yu. Of course, Xiao Hua's actions only made Daoist Master Yuan Qing respect him and trust him even more. He only urged his magic power to chase after Daoist Master Xiangtian, who was already close to the treasure. He didn't believe that Xiao Hua, who could save an ordinary golden core cultivator, wouldn't forget about him, a nascent soul cultivator that he had befriended. Rumble. At that moment, Reverend Xiangtian and the nameless nascent soul cultivator's magic treasure collided. Countless waves of qi surged out, and the fog that had been dispersed by the pillars of qi began to wreak havoc once again. Although the defensive formation borrowed the power of the heavens and was extremely powerful, the collision between two mid-nascent soul stage cultivators still caused the formation to shake a few times. The dozens of pillars of qi were once again shattered. Not good. Perhaps the bystanders were surprised by the fierceness of the battle between the two nascent soul cultivators, but Xiao Hua inwardly cursed, because as the defensive formation trembled, even more cold air and armored horses were born from the void. The few Jindan cultivators who were lucky enough to survive had just seen the dawn of life, but in a short moment, they were submerged by these armored horses. The battle between two nascent soul cultivators had indirectly taken the lives of several golden core cultivators. -12. Chapter 3606. Seeing this, Xiao Hua sighed in his heart. During the trip to Yarotai Mountain, Li Xiong had made it clear that they had to hide their strength and keep a low profile. Although Li Xiong might not have seen the immortal weapons hidden in the fog, he also knew that the Confucian cultivators would not easily let the Daoist cultivators go. Xiao Hua rashly wanted to save these Jindan cultivators and display his superhuman skills, but at this time, he really did not have the strength to do so. Several Jindan cultivators were scattered around the Great Formation. He had only used the soaring dragon shears to kill a dozen immortal weapons. Just as he was about to use his Yuanying hand to cover the nearest Jindan cultivator, there was a sound of surging waves. Countless ice currents flashing with an extremely cold aura appeared all around the Great Formation. One by one, ice cavalrymen, several jong tall, strangely protruded from the ice currents. Streams of vast qi once again rumbled and poured into these ice cavalrymen. Streaks of azure light seeped out from these ice cavalrymen. The azure dragon saber that they wielded was more powerful than any magic tool. Cracks appeared in the void as it flashed out. Even the magic treasures of Jindan cultivators could not achieve such an effect. The Confucian cultivators had gradually released their means. When these ice cavalrymen appeared, the Jindan cultivators were all greatly shocked. Their faces were ashen, and their hearts were filled with despair. Previously, the iron glacier armor had already beaten them to a pulp. Now, the ice cavalrymen were several times more powerful than the iron glacier armor. The Jindan cultivator's fighting spirit was completely gone, especially the Jindan cultivator near Xiao Hua's confinement area. He completely gave up resisting and only wanted to be protected by Xiao Hua. After Xiao Hua used the soaring dragon shears to kill a dozen ice cavalrymen, he really could no longer take care of this cultivator who had lost all fighting spirit. The ice cavalryman suddenly thrust forward, and an ice spear that was 100 times colder than ice pierced deeply into his back. Even the Jindan cultivator who was about to self-destruct was suppressed by this coldness. His entire body turned into an ice sculpture and fell to the ground. Not only that, but these cold currents that were like the eruption of an icy river instantly appeared everywhere within the imperial formation that spanned dozens of kilometers. Ice spears that were comparable to Jindan stage cultivators strangely appeared from the void. Even within the space that Xiao Hua had just sealed, the powerful imperial formation's heavenly might tore apart the restriction inch by inch. At the places where the restriction was torn apart, strands of icy currents appeared like blood clots. Hundreds of ice spears appeared along with the appearance of the ice cavalry, and each ice spear stabbed towards Xiao Hua like flying swords. Xiao Hua had no time to care about himself, let alone the several Jindan stage cultivators. After the ice spear appeared, they all died in the time it took to drink a cup of tea. Reverend Xiong Tian and the nameless Yuanying, who were charging towards the ancient treasure, were surrounded by ice cavalry just like Xiao Hua. These ice cavalry blocked their path, and even with all sorts of divine abilities, they were unable to kill these ice cavalry. Xiao Hua naturally had to resort to trickery. Although the Dharma eye between his eyebrows was not particularly obvious, it was still slightly open. After all, Confucian cultivators were very proficient in using deception tactics, so Xiao Hua naturally could not be careless. Sure enough, after a dozen ice cavalry arrived, an immortal general that was several times stronger than the ice cavalry rushed out of the icy water with an ice cavalry in his hand. With a whistle, he stabbed towards Xiao Hua like the other ice cavalry. Unfortunately, although this immortal general did not show his face, his filthy thoughts could not be exposed to the light of day. Xiao Hua also did not seem to notice. He casually waved his daoist robe and scattered most of the ice spears. A few ice cavalry powerlessly pierced the golden light protecting Xiao Hua's body. Seeing the ice spears pierce Xiao Hua's armpits, the immortal general raised his eyebrows slightly, as if he was happy. Unfortunately, his eyebrows seemed to have stopped there and could no longer be raised. At this moment, Xiao Hua suddenly shook his hand and a wishful staff appeared in his hand. The wishful staff whistled through the air, flashing past the ice spears and smashing into the immortal general's head. The immortal general did not understand how he had died under Xiao Hua's hands. This staff was too strange. No one would have imagined it. When Xiao Hua encountered such an obstruction, there was no need to mention daoist Shangtian, daoist Yuanqing, and the nameless nascent soul cultivator. There were even more cold currents near the strange treasure. Before daoist Yuanqing could catch up to daoist Shangtian, he was blocked by many ice cavalry and had no choice but to use his small halberd to meet them. The ice cavalry and ice spears might be the appetizer for these nascent soul cultivators, but the immortal general hidden among the ice cavalry was the appetizer. Several times, the three nascent soul cultivators were almost stabbed by the immortal general. How could the three nascent soul cultivators not know that something was wrong? Reverend Shangtian hurriedly slapped his hand on the door above him, causing a cluster of green light to shoot up into the air. The green light transformed into countless sword lights that rained down like a fountain, enveloping the space several hundred feet around Reverend Shangtian. These sword lights were filled with sword shadows and chilling intent. They strangled the ice river and frost inch by inch, not allowing the ice cavalry to appear again. Reverend Shangtian did the same. Reverend Yuanqing and the nameless nascent soul cultivator did the same. One of them unleashed a watercolored light that looked like a boat in the ocean to protect himself, while the other condensed a huge spindle-shaped magic treasure to shield himself. Neither the ice spears nor the cavalry could break through their defense. Seeing the few gold core cultivators inside the defensive formation fall into the ice river one after another, Xiao Hua sighed and withdrew his magic power. He used his divine sense to urge the soaring dragon shears to sweep away the ice spears and ice cavalry that came out of the ice river. The wishful staff in his hand also danced and flew toward daoist Shangtian and the others. For a moment, the entire defensive formation was in a stalemate with the four nascent soul cultivators. Although there were still dozens of ice rivers within the defensive formation, the ice rivers seemed to be helpless against the defenses of the four nascent soul cultivators. Seeing that the previous defense was effective, Daoist Shangtian immediately urged his flying sword to rush toward the treasure while the nameless nascent soul cultivator used his nascent soul hand to grab the treasure. Seeing this, Daoist Master Yuan Qing knew that this was an excellent opportunity. Almost without hesitation, he activated the small halberd. Streaks of crystalline thunderbolts flashed in the air, shattering countless ice spears. Like the nameless nascent soul attacking Daoist Master Shangtian from both sides, the halberd fell towards Daoist Master Shangtian's back. "You dare!" Daoist Shangtian coldly smiled and pointed his finger at the flying sword. The flying sword let out a whistling sound and instantly grew in size. It was originally flying toward the treasure, but it strangely changed direction and directly chopped toward the nameless nascent soul's nascent soul hand. Moreover, the momentum of this change was as heavy as a mountain, as if Daoist Shangtian had already planned for this. The nameless nascent soul's expression changed slightly. He knew that this was a diversion tactic, but at this point, the nameless nascent soul had no choice but to face it head-on. Looking at the smug expression on Reverend Xiongtian's face, he opened his mouth slightly. "Web." He spat out a mouthful of clear air, and a cauldron the size of a thumb flew into the air. Following his chanting, a dozen huge pillars of origin energy rose from the mouth of the cauldron and landed on the cauldron with a sound no less powerful than that of the pillars of origin energy. Wang. After the cauldron received the origin energy pillars, it shined brightly like a meteor and blocked the small halberd that was about to transform into a dragon. Rumble. In an instant, Daoist Shangtian used his flying sword to split open the nameless nascent soul's nascent soul hand and the cauldron to block Daoist Yuan Qing's small halberd magic treasure. With a loud sound, the entire defensive formation violently trembled. Whether it was the ice river or the mist, they were all violently tumbling, causing Daoist Yuan Qing to feel extremely bitter. Although he had overestimated Daoist Shangtian, this overestimation was not enough. They were both mid-stage nascent soul cultivators, but Daoist Shangtian was able to fight against two of them with ease. Daoist Yuan Qing didn't know what the nameless nascent soul cultivator was feeling. He only knew that his qi and blood were surging and the magic power in his body was tumbling like the ice river. A sharp sound seemed to be coming from his ears. Along with this sound, the sound of the peeper in the defensive formation reached its peak and soared into the sky. "I can't let Daoist Shangtian and that nameless nascent soul cultivator join forces. I must join forces with Xiao Hua to kill Daoist Shangtian." This was the only thought in Daoist Yuan Qing's mind. At the same time, he didn't care too much. While urging his magic power, his halberd flashed with an unusually strong brilliance. He desperately rushed towards Daoist Shangtian's cauldron. At the same time, he transmitted his voice to Xiao Hua, preparing to join forces with them to attack. However, the mist and ice river in the defensive formation were tumbling madly. The sound was loud and chaotic, and the noble qi was like a giant python that was slithering chaotically. Daoist Yuan Qing was unable to transmit his voice. "Oh no!" Daoist Yuan Qing's heart suddenly shuddered and he had an ominous feeling. As soon as this feeling appeared, the entire defensive formation suddenly fell silent. All the sounds of the peeper, the river of ice, and the roaring of the vast pillar of qi strangely disappeared, like the waning of the night. In this moment of extreme silence, Daoist Shangtian's cold plum blossom flying sword rushed out of the ice river and once again turned into a big plum blossom hand to grab the strange treasure on the cliff. "Damn it!" The big hand only rose a few feet, but Xiao Hua's angry voice was heard. The entire defensive formation was filled with the sound of thunder. Xiao Hua turned into a bolt of lightning and streaked across the sky, pouncing towards Daoist Shangtian's big plum blossom hand to stop him. Woo! In the midst of the thunder, a wisp of flute sound came from an unknown place. Although it was clear, it was extremely penetrating, and Xiao Hua's thunder was unable to cover it. Along with this flute sound, the entire defensive formation was suddenly filled with a burst of weak wind from all over. When Daoist Shangtian saw Xiao Hua using the thunder escape technique, he was shocked. He pointed his finger at the cauldron and dodged Daoist Yuan Qing's halberd, which suddenly grew several times larger and fell towards Xiao Hua's head. Although Xiao Hua's thunder escape technique was extremely fast, the cauldron produced a huge suction force, and he had to pass through it. Xiao Hua sneered and waved the wishful staff in his hand. In the eyes of Daoist Shangtian, the wishful staff inconceivably grew longer and bigger and hit the cauldron. The cauldron was no longer under Daoist Shangtian's control and began to tumble in the air. -12. Chapter 3608. Daoist Shangtian. Xiao Hua waved the wishful staff and shouted angrily, "Can't you see? Every time you fight someone, you cause a change in the defensive formation, and each change is stronger than the last. You've already caused more than 10 golden core cultivators to die in the defensive formation. Do you want to drag us down with you?" Xiao Hua's voice was extremely loud. It sounded like a thunderclap inside the defensive formation. When Reverend Yuan Qing heard it, he couldn't help but feel shaken. He was immediately stunned. How could this Xiao Hua possibly speak inside the defensive formation? "Daoist Xiao." Daoist Yuan Qing hastily said, but as he thought, even though his voice contained magic power, it still couldn't reach far. It was at this moment that the flute sound in the defense formation suddenly became sharp. The weak wind that was generated earlier suddenly intensified. The weak wind was more powerful than any magic weapon. When it blew on immortal Yuan Qing's body, the golden light that protected his body was extinguished in a visible manner. Not only that, but the light on Ming Hao's halberd was also flickering rapidly. A feeling of friction between the halberd and the sand was transmitted from Ming Hao's halberd. Even the magic treasure couldn't withstand the weak wind of the defensive array. "Not good." Daoist Yuan Qing's expression changed and he opened his mouth. A blue bead rushed into the air, and a watery brilliance fell, completely covering Daoist Yuan Qing. In the weak wind, a string of small bubbles appeared on the surface of the light. The bubbles popped and popped like boiling water. Even though the water bead couldn't completely resist the weak wind, Daoist Yuan Qing let out a long sigh of relief. He reached out to grab Ming Hao's halberd, but when he tried to use his magic power, the weak wind blocked his magic power. Ming Hao's halberd flashed a few times, and like a wanderer unwilling to turn back, it only struggled to return several feet. Daoist Yuan Qing had no choice but to use his flying light to fly in the direction of Ming Hao's halberd. At this moment, the expressions of Reverend Shangtian and the nameless cultivator changed slightly. Reverend Shangtian was shocked by Xiao Hua's divine ability and opened his mouth as if he wanted to say something, but no sound came out. In the end, Reverend Shangtian didn't dare to act rashly and recalled the cold plum blossom flying sword and the cauldron. In just a moment, half of the cold plum blossom flying sword had been blown away by the wind, causing Reverend Shangtian to be shocked. The nameless cultivator seemed to have been prepared for this. Seeing his magic weapon being corroded by the weak wind, he didn't seem surprised, but when he heard Xiao Hua's voice, he was greatly alarmed. He opened his mouth and a pale white bead flew into the air. The bead's brilliance didn't cover a large area, only a few dozen feet in size, but within this area, not a single weak wind could be produced. Air-frozen bead? Reverend Shangtian's eyes lit up. The flying sword seemed to be greedy, and it shrank a few times in the air before returning to his hand. This was because at this moment, Xiao Hua, who Reverend Shangtian was most unsure of, had arrived. Although the golden light around Xiao Hua's body flickered slightly in the wind, as if it was being eroded by the wind, Xiao Hua's flying speed was much faster than before. Although it couldn't compare to the lightning evasion technique, in the eyes of Reverend Shangtian, his heart couldn't help but skip a beat. After all, Xiao Hua was his enemy and not his friend. "All of you, stop." After several changes in the defensive formation, Xiao Hua was finally able to say these words in front of the two mid-nascent soul stage cultivators. "If anyone dares to act rashly again, this Xiao will immediately kill them." With that, Xiao Hua's eyes swept over Reverend Shangtian and the nameless cultivator like lightning. Reverend Shangtian flew into a rage and the flying sword in his hand flew into the air again. His previous misgivings were thrown far away as he loudly shouted, "Brat, what qualifications do you have to order this old man around? What divine ability do you have to kill this old man? What if I join in?" The nameless cultivator's eyes twitched in the face of Xiao Hua's fierce expression. When he heard Reverend Shangtian's challenge, his eyes flashed with a trace of ridicule. He raised his hand and a small drumstick that he had put away earlier shined with a yellow light. Join in. Reverend Yuanqing finally arrived and said with a smile, Minghao's halberd in his hand. Timpate. Reverend Xiangtian coldly snorted and said, even if it's the three of you, do you think this old man will be afraid of you? However, although Reverend Xiangtian's voice was fierce, the flying sword in his hand didn't fly out. Xiao Hua coldly smiled and said, I don't know if you're afraid or not. What I do know is that if you don't cooperate with the three of us, not to mention the treasures on the cliff, even your life will be lost. With that said, Xiao Hua pointed to the left and sternly shouted, take a look. The defensive formation is filled with weak winds and glacier. There are also immortal soldiers and immortal generals hidden inside. Don't tell me you don't know the existence of these immortal generals and how powerful they are. A few golden core cultivators won't be able to fight back in front of them. Even nascent soul cultivators like us won't be able to escape if they surround us. Reverend Xiangtian's words were still unyielding. That's what you think. This old man naturally has his own divine ability. Don't think I don't know what you're planning. You're just using the excuse of cooperation to prevent this old man from obtaining the treasures. Xiao Hua ignored Reverend Xiangtian and turned to the nameless cultivator. He cupped his hands and said, I am Xiao Hua of Black Cloud Mountain. How should I address you, fellow Daoist? The nameless cultivator smiled and said, I am Shu Tingzi of the Jingxi Mountain Villa. Good. Xiao Hua nodded and asked, fellow Daoist Shu Tingzi, do you wish to sign with the Imperial Teacher? The Imperial Teacher's sign? Shu Tingzi smiled. I don't need it. Yes. Xiao Hua nodded and smiled. I need the Imperial Teacher's sign. Since fellow Daoist needs different things, we should be able to work together. As you wish. Shu Tingzi was even more delighted. Your wish is my wish. Reverend Xiangtian. Xiao Hua glanced at Reverend Xiangtian. Do you want to oppose the three of us? So what if I oppose you? So what if I don't oppose you? Reverend Xiangtian looked around and saw that the weak wind had already started to condense. These strands of weak wind gradually turned into hurricanes. When these weak winds converged into hurricanes, even a mid-stage nascent soul cultivator like him wouldn't be able to deal with them. He had no choice but to find a way out of this situation. I won't talk about the consequences of opposing you, Xiao Hua said indifferently. If you want to work together, then let's put aside our grudges for the time being. As for the strange treasure on the cliff, let's put it aside for the time being. We'll first work together to protect ourselves and use our divine abilities to break this defensive formation. Ha ha. Xiao Hua, are you joking? Reverend Xiangtian didn't wait for Xiao Hua to finish speaking and laughed loudly. Break this defensive formation? Do you know what this defensive formation is? How dare you talk about breaking it so arrogantly? Xiao Hua slightly frowned and said indifferently, since it's a formation, it can be broken regardless of whether it's a Daoist formation or a Confucian formation. I don't think there's anything wrong with what I said. Reverend Xiangtian coldly snorted. The ignorant are truly fearless. Let this old man tell you, although this old man doesn't know what this imperial formation is, seeing that it can injure both you and me, this imperial formation must be one of the famous 28-star sovereign imperial formations of the Jade Pavilion Conference. In the past, the cultivators who participated in the Jade Pavilion Conference were able to walk out of this defensive formation and obtain the Imperial Teacher's sign. There was no need to go through any selection. I've never heard of the 28-star monarch defensive formations being broken. Let's hear Reverend Xiao out. Reverend Yuanqing said coldly. You and I might not be able to break this defensive formation, but it's still possible for us to protect ourselves and obtain the strange treasure inside the defensive formation. That's right. Xiao Hua took advantage of the situation and said, we'll first work together to protect ourselves and then obtain the strange treasure together. If it's the Imperial Teacher's sign, then I'll thank you three fellow Taoists. If it's not the Imperial Teacher's sign, then after we escape from the defensive formation, you three will discuss how to divide it. Who's going to take the strange treasure? Reverend Xiangtian asked straightforwardly. Xiao Hua said proudly, naturally, it's me. Why is it you and not me? Reverend Xiangtian was immediately dissatisfied. Because I'm Xiao Hua. Xiao Hua looked at Reverend Shangtian and said word by word. Reverend Yuanqing clapped his hands. I agree. What about you? Fellow Daoist Shu Tingzi. Xiao Hua looked at Shu Tingzi. Shu Tingzi pondered for a moment. He looked at Reverend Yuanqing and then at his air-frozen bead, which had already begun to waver. He couldn't help but say tentatively, I'm afraid this air-frozen bead won't be able to last for long. If Reverend Xiao has the means to protect us while we head to the place where the strange treasure is, then I'll agree for fellow Daoist to take it. Yes, I'll naturally agree to this. As Xiao Hua spoke, he waved his hand and the weak water bead flew into the air. As soon as the weak water bead flew out, puffs of weak water fell down and formed a water curtain of varying density that protected the four of them. The dense weak water blocked the weak wind. Although the weak wind was able to pass through the sparse weak water, Reverend Yuanqing and the others could see through the sparse weak water. The weak wind that passed through the sparse weak water couldn't threaten the safety of the four of them. Good. I'll listen to Reverend Xiao's arrangement. Shu Tingzi was overjoyed and hastily put away the air-frozen bead. Reverend Shangtian looked at the weak water bead above Xiao Hua's head and his eyes flickered. The current situation had already been decided. If he didn't agree to Xiao Hua's request, then Xiao Hua would definitely make a move. Reverend Shangtian had the strength to fight against Reverend Yuanqing and Shu Tingzi, but now that Xiao Hua's strength was unfathomable. Reverend Shangtian pondered for a moment and said indifferently, given the current situation, do I still have a choice? Let's go. Seeing that Reverend Shangtian didn't object, Xiao Hua didn't beat around the bush. He pointed at the weak water bead and flew toward the cliff. Reverend Shangtian was even faster than Reverend Yuanqing and Shu Tingzi. His body swayed and landed on Xiao Hua's left hand. He was within the range of the weak water bead and maintained a sufficient distance from Xiao Hua. Reverend Yuanqing wasn't in a hurry. He raised his hand slightly and signaled Shu Tingzi to fly in front while he followed Xiao Hua behind. -13. Chapter 3609. Rumble. Innumerable pillars of weak wind raged within the defensive array, as though they were going to tear the entire space apart. The pillars of wind hit the weak water, causing the water curtain of the weak water to shake violently, and a lot of weak wind rushed into it. Without waiting for Xiao Hua to speak, Shu Tingzi didn't dare to be negligent and hurriedly took out the air-frozen pearl. Under the pale white brilliance, the weak wind weakened by 60%. The weakened weak wind naturally couldn't threaten the four nascent soul cultivators. Immortal Yuanqing stole a glance at the weak wind storm outside the brilliance and trembled in his heart. He knew very well that if it weren't for Xiao Hua and Shu Tingzi, he would have some means to deal with the weak wind. However, after using these means, his strength would be greatly reduced. Not to mention snatching the rare treasure, he might not even be able to escape from this defensive formation. The most likely outcome was that he would die in the formation of one of the 28 celestial lords. This. Immortal Yuanqing was greatly astonished and muttered to himself, it seems that the previous Jadestage gathering wasn't like this. Why is this year's Jadestage gathering so strange? Unfortunately, there were only unexpected things in this world, but there was nothing that others could not achieve. Just as Reverend Yuanqing thought he was lucky, a series of crackling noises that sounded like thunderclaps were heard from the sky above the defensive formation. Streams of icy rivers that were several times stronger than before poured down in torrents. Weak gusts of wind crashed into the icy rivers, and soldiers that were tens of feet tall and even hundreds of feet tall gushed out. These soldiers were either roaring barefooted or riding on horseback while brandishing their spears as they charged toward the four men along with the icy rivers. Watch this old man's technique. Immortal Shangtian roared and waved his arms. The flying sword in his left hand turned into a cold plum and rushed out of the air-frozen pearl's brilliance to protect the weak water pearl. The cold plum slightly rotated and the sword rays emitted a glaring brilliance. Immortal Shangtian's right hand let out a roar from the cauldron. Samadhi true fire flew out from the cauldron and formed a layer of fire shield around the cold plum sword rays. Xiao Hua's weak water droplet could only block the weak wind, it could not block the condensed ice river soldiers. When the valiant soldiers rushed into the weak water droplet, they were immediately killed by the samadhi true fire. They either turned into the weak wind, or turned into the ice river and fell down. Even if there were some that were not killed by the samadhi true fire, the cold plum blossom sword light behind it could also kill them. Immortal Xiangtian really lives up to his reputation. Xiao Hua understood and nodded his head inwardly. He also understood that there must be something else in Reverend Xiangtian's samadhi true fire. Although Xiao Hua didn't mention how the treasures would be distributed after obtaining the imperial tutor's lot, it was clear that if one didn't contribute, they wouldn't have the qualifications to obtain the treasures. Once Daoist Xiangtian revealed his two treasures, Shu Tingzi and Daoist Yuan Qing immediately paled in comparison. Daoist Xiangtian couldn't help but reveal a proud expression. Of course, Immortal Yuan Qing wouldn't agree. He waved his hand and was about to use the halberd when Xiao Hua sneered and said, Immortal Yuan Qing, about 10 feet away from your left hand, attack with all your strength. Immortal Yuan Qing was stunned. However, he didn't dare to be careless. He circulated all the magic energy in his body and the immortal halberd in his hand roared. It turned into a blue dragon and pounced towards the area 10 feet away from him. That was where the weak wind and the ice river had just appeared. Boom! Before the immortal halberd reached the ice river, the space around him was covered by the halberd's aura. Catcher sounds came from the ice river. When the dragon pounced into the ice river, a blood-curdling scream was heard. A immortal general wearing immortal armor fell out of his chest with a bloody hole. The immortal general's face was filled with disbelief. Sigh. Immortal Yuan Qing sucked in a breath of cold air, let alone immortal Xiangtian and Shu Tingzi. This was an immortal general, a Confucian cultivator with 4th grade origin energy. His strength was comparable to an early nascent soul cultivator. Even though he was hiding in the defensive formation, he was still seen through by Xiao Hua. Xiao Hua's words about breaking the formation were not just empty word. 30 feet above your head. Xiao Hua shouted again. Immortal Yuan Qing no longer had any doubts. The immortal halberd once again soared into the sky. Ah! Another blood-curdling scream was heard. The second immortal general was killed on the spot. Too powerful. Immortal Yuan Qing was full of admiration for Xiao Hua. Shu Tingzi, 20 feet ahead. Xiao Hua shouted again. Shu Tingzi's face lit up with joy. The small drumstick in his hand flew out. Woo! A clear sound came from the drumstick. A yellow light condensed into a sharp arrow and disappeared into the void. When it reappeared, it was already 20 feet away from the weak wind. As the three expected, the corpse of a decapitated immortal general appeared again. Go! Xiao Hua ordered again. The three hurriedly used their flying techniques and followed Xiao Hua for several hundred feet. Kill! Following Xiao Hua's orders, close to 10 immortal generals were forced out of the defensive formation. Of course, these 10 immortal generals were not killed. Among them, 4 were only seriously injured. Then, they borrowed the power of the defensive formation to escape. After these 4 immortal generals escaped, the entire defensive formation became a little quieter. No other immortal generals flew out to kill them. Without the immortal generals blocking them, the 4 arrived at the bottom of the cliff in a short while. The light of the strange treasure above their heads could be seen clearly. It was a square jade box. Let's fly over. Immortal Yuan Qing, take it. Xiao Hua did not wait for the 3 to say anything. He immediately ordered, then, I will take care of it. Okay. Immortal Yuan Qing did not hesitate. He urged his body to fly up with Xiao Hua. However, as the 4 approached the cliff, Immortal Yuan Qing was about to reach out his hand. Rumble. The entire defensive formation let out a loud rumble. It was as if the sky was falling and the earth was splitting. All the sounds of the flute, the river of ice, and the army were drowned out. In front of Xiao Hua and the others, the entire cliff was shaking. With this shaking, the cliff rapidly retreated. Even the weak wind, the river of ice, and the sound of the flute disappeared in the shaking. What is going on? Immortal Yuan Qing was shocked. His hand unconsciously froze. Looking at the jade box within reach, immortal Yuan Qing involuntarily used his divine ability. A large hand came out of his sleeve and streaked across the sky, chasing after the fleeing cliff. The nascent soul hand can be used. Divine sense can be used as well. Immortal Yuan Qing was overjoyed. After a sweep of his divine sense, he exclaimed in surprise. At the same time, the halberd of Ming Hao flew out and flew toward the cliff in the distance. Yes, divine sense can be used. Immortal Xiong Tian was also overjoyed. However, he immediately cried out, "Not good, this defensive formation seems to have expanded a lot." Without waiting for him to finish speaking, a slightly hoarse voice called out from the distant horizon, "Eh? Where is this? Ayo, is this a rare treasure? Let's see who dares to snatch it from this old man." Before the voice fell, a large hand that was several times larger than immortal Yuan Qing's nascent soul hand streaked across the sky. Following the large hand was a magic treasure that was not inferior to Ming Hao's halberd. It released a powerful aura and fell toward the cliff. A rare treasure? Who dares to snatch it from me? Immediately after, an extremely arrogant voice came from the other side. Another large hand appeared in the sky. Xiao Hua's soul had already swept through the entire defensive formation. Just as immortal Xiong Tian had said, the defensive formation had expanded by several times. Within this expanded range, there were more than 20 nascent soul cultivators and hundreds of gold core cultivators. There were far more cultivators than the ones who had fallen into the defensive formation before. There was no need to think too much about it. Xiao Hua already understood that the Star Monarch defense array that these cultivators had fallen into earlier was definitely not the Star Monarch defense array. This Star Monarch defense array must have connected several or even dozens of other defense arrays together. Either it wanted to catch them all in one fell swoop, or it wanted to take advantage of the situation. However, regardless of what the people of Celestial Lord Hall were planning, Xiao Hua's plan had failed. Reverend Xiangtian had already taken out 2 more magic treasures and used his nascent soul hand to snatch the jade box from Reverend Yuan Qing and the others. Reverend Yuan Qing, who was not far away, saw that his divine ability was inferior to the others and called out, "Reverend Xiao, quickly give this poor Daoist a hand." Xiao Hua frowned. He felt that immortal Yuan Qing's call was a bit abrupt, but he didn't think too much about it. After all, he was the one who had come up with the plan. It was normal for immortal Yuan Qing to ask for help if he couldn't get the jade box. Thus, Xiao Hua clapped his hand and the nascent soul hand immediately rushed out and grabbed towards the cliff. Xiao Hua's nascent soul hand was much larger than the others, and its speed was also much faster. However, just as he was halfway there, the nascent soul hands that rushed out earlier felt that they were not as fast as Xiao Hua. Immediately, there was a rumbling sound as they all flipped their hands at the same time. Several nascent soul hands grabbed at Xiao Hua's large hand. Seeing that Daoist Yuanqing's hand was still in the lead, Xiao Hua understood Daoist Yuanqing's intention. With a flip of his hand expanded once again, tightly grabbing the hands of several nascent soul cultivators. Catcher! The entire space trembled. Xiao Hua's giant hand shook a few times and tore apart the other nascent soul cultivators' giant hands. Only when the several giant hands slowly disappeared did Xiao Hua's giant hand collapse with a loud bang. Everyone turned pale with fright and looked at each other. At this moment, a deafening sound of a flute rang out above everyone's heads. The sound of wind and water appeared again. What made everyone tremble with fear was that a 3-colored giant python fell from the sky with an indescribable majesty along with the sound of the flute. The 3-colored majesty filled the entire defensive formation. Whether it was the cauldron, the flying sword, or the Hongming halberd, they all paled in comparison. Immortal Xiong Tian turned pale with fright. His heart trembled as he whispered, 28th Star Lord? -13. Chapter 36:10. Just as Daoist Xiangtian let out a low cry, the 3-colored giant python had already landed on Xiao Hua's back. Xiao Hua's nascent soul hand had just collapsed, so he simply didn't have the time to use a divine ability to resist. Boom! The giant python pierced Xiao Hua's back, revealing a bowl-shaped spear. Poof! Xiao Hua seemed to have been struck by lightning, and he spat out a mouthful of blood essence. His entire body trembled a few times on the spear before slowly falling down, and his arm powerlessly drooped down. Daoist Xiao. Daoist Yuan Qing raised his eyebrows. The appearance of this long spear was really unexpected. Seeing that Xiao Hua was seriously injured, Daoist Yuan Qing seemed to have thought of something. He cried out in alarm and stopped. That huge hand that was rushing towards the sky and the halberd that was following closely behind also restrained its brilliance and carefully stopped in midair. The spear that had injured Xiao Hua paused for a moment beside Xiao Hua, as if it was hesitating. Then, it turned back into a python and flew back into the sky. The pressure that caused all the nascent soul cultivators to tremble disappeared without a trace. Chimpage. Daoist Xiangtian let out a cold snort and the giant hand that had stopped moved once again. While the nascent soul cultivators were hesitating, it immediately rushed forward. Daoist Xiangtian turned into a rainbow and the cold plum blossom flying sword let out a thunderous roar as it protected him. It was as if he wasn't afraid of being killed by the celestial monarch. Xiao Hua. Daoist Yuan Qing stood in the air and scanned Xiao Hua's body with his divine sense. He frowned as if he was hesitating, but only for a moment. Daoist Yuan Qing also turned into a rainbow and the halberd shined brightly. With a thunderous roar, a ferocious dragon shape appeared once again. However, this dragon shape didn't chase after Daoist Yuan Qing. Instead, it waited in the air until Daoist Yuan Qing flew past it before charging into Daoist Yuan Qing's golden light shield. Shu Tingzi was originally in a daze, but when he saw Daoist Yuan Qing also abandon Xiao Hua, he immediately understood. The reason the celestial official in charge of the defensive formation killed Xiao Hua was not because Xiao Hua wanted to snatch the rare treasure. The rare treasure of the defensive formation was something that should be snatched. Instead, it was because Xiao Hua and the other three had killed the immortal general controlling the formation, or perhaps it could be said that because of Xiao Hua's existence, the four people who should have been fighting fiercely did not fight to the death. Instead, they formed a rope. Although they did not have the strength to break through the defensive formation, they still made the star venerates guarding the formation feel afraid, which was why they attacked. Sigh. Shu Tingzi looked at where Xiao Hua had landed and wanted to help. However, he didn't dare to offend the star monarch controlling the array. After all, the star monarch guarding the array was a 5th-stage origin Qi realm cultivator. He was far from being a match for him. However, Shu Tingzi sighed. He knew that he no longer had the advantage of being the first to enter the array. At this moment, even the other nascent soul cultivators who had just entered the array were stronger than him, let alone Sage Xiangtian. He could only look for other opportunities. As a result, Shu Tingzi decided not to snatch the treasure. Instead, he released his divine sense and carefully observed the movements of the defensive formation. He wanted to find an opportunity to escape from the defensive formation. Moreover, Shu Tingzi was selfish. He wasn't too far away from where Xiao Hua had landed. When the defensive formation was in chaos, he wanted to see if he could bring the heavily injured Xiao Hua along with him. Of course, this was only a trace of kindness. Shu Tingzi didn't know if the star monarch controlling the formation would let Xiao Hua go. Daoist Yuan Qing and Sage Xiangtian moved. Whether it was their nascent soul cultivators or their escape techniques, they immediately alerted the other nascent soul cultivators. In the beginning, the other cultivators were naturally puzzled. They thought that the two of them were not afraid of death and dared to oppose the star monarch guarding the formation. However, when they saw that the two of them were getting closer and closer to the treasure and that murderous tri-colored python spear had yet to appear, how could they still hold themselves back? Damn it! A nascent soul mid-stage cultivator angrily cursed. He opened his mouth and a magic treasure that looked like a string of beads rushed into the air. Then, the entire string of beads exploded. As the cultivator spat out a mouthful of blood essence on it, the beads transformed into sinister skulls. They let out soul-stirring screeches in the air and rushed towards the treasure as fast as lightning. Another cultivator slapped his forehead. A very delicate crane emerged from the top of his head. It let out a soft cry in the air and flapped its wings before falling into the void. When it reappeared, it was already 300 meters away. There were even several nascent soul cultivators who let out loud roars. Magic power surged around their bodies and the spiritual energy of heaven and earth madly poured into them. They either flickered with golden light or faintly glowed with green light. There was even one who had a demonic body. Feeling that they could not stop others from obtaining the treasure, the cultivators prepared to intercept Sage Shangtian or Daoist Yuan Qing from all directions. However, the cultivator who had a demonic body was a strange winged demonic body. When he spread his wings, his flight was equally astonishing. He joined the ranks of the cultivators who fought for the treasure. The nascent soul cultivators within the defensive formation each used their own methods to fight for the treasure. How could the 100 or so golden core cultivators who were swept into the defensive formation dare to approach? They did not even have the intention to take advantage of the situation like Shu Tingzi. They only trembled as they descended. They were prepared to find some spiritual herbs and other items within the defensive formation. Otherwise, they would wait in a safe place and escape when a flaw appeared in the defensive formation. The nascent soul cultivator with the demonic body seemed to be the fastest. In just a few breaths, he had already caught up to the hand of a nascent soul cultivator. How could the hand let him go? The hand whistled and grabbed at the air, wanting to stop the cultivator. Kaka! The nascent soul cultivator let out a long laugh. He did not use any other abilities. Instead, he flapped his wings and charged toward the hand. Rumble. A loud sound echoed through the defensive formation once more. A large hole was created in the hand of the nascent soul cultivator. The nascent soul cultivator's demonic body staggered and was about to fly back into the sky. However, at that moment, a ray of light appeared. It was an unknown nascent soul cultivator's magic treasure that blocked the path of the nascent soul cultivator. Pa! Just as the ray of light appeared, it immediately turned into a 5-colored screen and covered the nascent soul cultivator before the nascent soul cultivator could see it clearly. Not only that, but right after the loud noise, the entire defensive formation shook again. The life-threatening sound of the peeper rang out, and the Ice River iron horses broke free from their reins. This formation was even stranger than the one Xiao Hua and the others had encountered before. After the sound of the peeper, the sound of the whistle also rang out. The weak wind and the dense fog coexisted, and there was a sense of harmony between the zither and the zither. Kill! Battle cries rang out from the omnipresent cavalry. The already chaotic defensive formation became even more chaotic as battle cries shook the heavens. Damn it! Seeing that his head was blocked by the 5-colored light and that there was a dazzling light coming toward him, the nascent soul cultivator was furious. Blue light appeared around his body like a wave and a dragon horn gradually appeared on his forehead. The moment the horn appeared, his aura increased and his wings expanded even more. He flapped his wings and his demonic body charged toward the light like a meteor. He wanted to break this magic treasure just like he had broken through the nascent soul cultivator's hand. However, he didn't notice that a weak wind was quietly blowing above his head. Puff! The nascent soul crashed into the countless screens of light. The screens of light closed up like a peacock folding its wings. However, in front of the screens of light, a ray of blue light shot out like a sharp thorn. Boom! The space several dozen feet around him shook. The magic treasure was actually shattered by the nascent soul cultivator's nascent soul cultivator. Puff! In the distance, a short nascent soul cultivator's expression changed and he spat out a mouthful of blood. It was clear that his life source magic treasure had been destroyed and he had suffered a lot of damage. However, before he could take out a healing pill from his Chenkuan bag, he heard a burst of ear-piercing peeper music below him. A dozen ice spears suddenly pierced toward him, scaring the cultivator into hastily forming hand seals. A light as large as a mountain smashed down and blocked the ice spears. Whoosh! Immediately after, a weak wind blew and a sizzling sound could be heard. The short cultivator's already somewhat dim protective light was blown out even more. Not good. The short cultivator grew alert and hastily slapped his forehead. A 5-meter-tall nascent soul appeared with a broken fan in its hand. However, there was a trace of golden blood at the corner of the nascent soul's mouth and its face was dispirited. Shua! The moment the nascent soul appeared, It immediately rubbed its hands and the fan fell. The five-colored light was about to cover the cultivator's body once more. Unfortunately, just as the five-colored brilliance swept past the cultivator's neck, an iron spear emerged from the wind and mysteriously pierced the cultivator's back. "Ayo!" The small nascent soul let out a roar. It was clearly extremely angry. It reached out and a blood-red restriction smashed down like thunder. Boom! After a loud bang, the iron spear broke in half and was thrown into the air. A mouthful of blood came out of the wind, but when the wind blew by, everything disappeared. Damn it! The nascent soul helplessly looked at its lifeless body and the large hole in its back. It let out a sharp curse, then light surged around its body and it was about to fly away. Just at this moment, a sudden change occurred. Woo! A dense fog appeared. It was several times more dense than anywhere else. Along with this dense fog, an aura that could even suffocate a grade 5 origin energy cultivator came out from the nascent soul's body. A pillar of boundless chi that was even more solid than the nascent soul's hand covered the nascent soul. GG. The nascent soul was shocked. As it screamed, it spat out several mouthfuls of blood, which turned into extremely bright symbols. The symbols disappeared into the nascent soul's body. The nascent soul's body disappeared in the blink of an eye. This nascent soul wanted to use teleportation to escape from the boundless chi pillar. Boom! The boundless chi pillar rumbled as it rushed into the void, causing the surrounding space to distort intensely. That nascent soul no longer made any sound. Furthermore, the rumbling sound of the boundless chi pillar was not that loud compared to the neighs of the glacier war horses. The group of cultivators who were focused on the treasures on the cliff did not notice the disappearance of a nascent soul. -13. Chapter 36:11. Since the nascent soul stage adepts who had sneak attacked others ended up in such a miserable state, the nascent soul stage adepts who had been sneak attacked did not fare any better. The Dharma stage adept with a demon body had just rushed out of the magic treasure with his powerful demon body. The green light around him flashed rapidly, as if his Dharma power was not enough to support his Dharma form. At this moment, the ice river suddenly flowed, and a group of armored horses stepped on the ice and surrounded him in an instant. Although the sound of cracking could be heard at the beginning, when the wind blew and the fog arrived, the nascent soul stage adept with a demon body did not appear again. Which of the dozens of nascent soul stage adepts was not arrogant? Which of them would be willing to submit to others? Which of them would care about the ice river and armored horses created by the defense array? Even if they found out that someone was injured or killed, they would only feel happy. They would only feel that there was one less person competing with them. Who would think more about it? On the contrary, the golden elixir stage adepts began to gather together and form a certain formation to resist the defense array together. Of course, their strength was insignificant in this battle between the 28 Star Lords. In a short time, dozens of adepts had fallen. Fortunately, they were not the main targets of the Star-Lord Palace, so there were no immortal generals around them. Sigh. Since ancient times, the onlookers had a clearer view of the situation. Shu Tingzi did not feel much when he was fighting for the rare treasure, but now that he was standing at the side and saw how fierce the defense array was, he could not help but suck in a breath of cold air. If this Yarotai meeting is so dangerous, even if it's for the Imperial Preceptor's lot, even if it's for the rare treasure, who would still participate? Could it be that Kong Hongwu is stupid? In just half a day, several nascent soul stage adepts and dozens of golden elixir stage adepts have fallen in this defense array. What about the other defense arrays? Moreover, there are immortal soldiers and immortal generals hiding in the fog and in the weak water. It is far from what the rumors said before that the defense array was only created by the defense array. Could it be that this Yarotai meeting is different from the previous ones? In the past, no matter how few the Imperial Preceptor's lots were, there were at least dozens or even 50. How could there only be 10? No matter how rare the rare treasures in the past were, it seemed that they could not be compared to this one. Previously, when this old man heard about the rare treasure, I was already blinded by greed. Now that I think about it, isn't this a dead end? Shu Tingzi immediately broke out in a cold sweat when he thought of the death trap. Since it was a death trap, how could there be any survivors? Since it was a dead end, how could he allow anyone to speak of this matter? In an instant, Shu Tingzi understood why the Star-Lord Hall had given out the lot of 10 Imperial advisors and why they had taken out 3 rare treasures. Perhaps there were survivors, and there were 13 of them. Perhaps more, but definitely not too much. The Confucian cultivator's methods are truly too ruthless. Shu Tingzi didn't know why the Confucian cultivator was so ruthless, but he knew that this trip wasn't a good one. What should we do? Shu Tingzi's gaze was fixed on the Imperial Array. Cries of murder filled the entire Imperial Array. Reverend Xiangtian and Reverend Yuanqing's figures had already disappeared. The Dharma treasures on the cliff shone with boundless brilliance, and the pillars of Aaron Chi soared into the sky. However, the dense fog and weak water blocked all of this. Shu Tingzi could only see the golden core cultivators fleeing in panic like ants. Perhaps I'll have a chance to survive if I mix in with the golden core cultivators. However, if I do that, how am I supposed to live in the future? How am I supposed to survive in the Dao sect? What a pity. If only Xiao Hua was here. That's right, Xiao Hua. That Daoist Xiao seemed to have been injured by the Star-Lord guarding the array, but he didn't die like the other nascent soul cultivators. Moreover, that python spear hesitated for a moment, as if it was confirming Xiao Hua's death. Damn it, I'll go all out. Thinking of Xiao Hua's abilities, Shu Tingzi couldn't help but feel excited. Xiao Hua was still alive even after being killed by a Star-Lord at the 5th stage of origin energy. This level of strength was far beyond his reach. If he could save Xiao Hua, not only would he be indebted to him, he could even borrow Xiao Hua's strength to escape from the Imperial Array. Shu Tingzi weighed the pros and cons. He looked at the sky, then looked at the fierce battle in the distance. After destroying a few glacier, he quietly landed at the place where Xiao Hua had landed. Shu Tingzi looked into the distance and also thought about the sky. However, he forgot that he was also a nascent soul cultivator. Some golden core cultivators not too far away from him were also thinking about him. Seeing Shu Tingzi quietly land, about 20 golden core cultivators exchanged glances and also followed him to the bottom of the Imperial Array from a distance. The golden core cultivators thought very well, but when they got close to Shu Tingzi, they were dumbfounded. They thought that Shu Tingzi had found a flaw in the defensive formation, but when they saw Shu Tingzi, they only saw him carrying the unconscious Xiao Hua with one hand with a strange expression on his face. You. Shu Tingzi was even more dumbfounded than these golden core cultivators. However, he didn't have time to think too much. Several weak winds and glacier appeared between him and the golden core cultivators. Even if the golden core cultivators fought bravely, 2 of them still died on the spot before Shu Tingzi could make a move. We juniors are trapped in this Imperial Array and don't have the ability to escape. We only hope that Senior can help us. Once we leave the Imperial Array, we will definitely follow you through life and death. We will serve Senior or Senior's country. Seeing that Shu Tingzi had made a move, the 2 late golden core cultivators at the front were overjoyed and hastily spoke. Don't. Shu Tingzi raised his hand and quickly waved it, but before he could say anything, his expression froze. Then, his eyes darted around a few times, and he changed the topic. There was some bitterness and some difficulty in his voice as he said, "Forget it. Since we are fated to meet, why not help you this time?" How could the golden core cultivators notice that Shu Tingzi's tone was strange? All of them were about to bow, but just as they were about to do so, Shu Tingzi spoke again. However, even I am powerless within the defense formation. I still have to split my energy to take care of all of you. Swear a blood oath right now, or I won't agree. Shu Tingzi's words were very honest. No one would risk their lives for a cultivator they didn't know. The golden core cultivator's words from before were indeed a bit careless, so the 2 golden core cultivators at the front didn't hesitate to make the oath. Sure enough, among the 20 or so cultivators, there were still 4 golden core cultivators who weren't sincere. They didn't wait to make the blood oath before activating their magic treasures and rushing elsewhere. They must be looking for their own opportunities inside the Imperial array. Shu Tingzi looked at the backs of these cultivators and coldly smiled. He waved his hand and said, "Activate your magic treasures and form an ordinary formation behind me." Although the golden core cultivator at the front had said his name when he made the oath, how could Shu Tingzi remember it at this critical moment? He pointed with his finger and said, You, the three of you stand in front of the other people's heads. The rest of you, find 3 people to stand behind them. Yes. The golden core disciple at the front hurriedly agreed. He turned around and called out a few names. They lined up according to Shu Tingzi's instructions. At this moment, a weak wind blew, and the ice river appeared. Shu Tingzi led the nearly 20 golden core cultivators into the wind and rain of the formation. With a nascent soul cultivator like Shu Tingzi taking care of them, the 20 golden core cultivators only paid the price of 2 golden core cultivators being injured. Shu Tingzi's magic treasure was shaped like a drumstick. When he activated it with all his strength, it produced a yellow glow around it. It was called the heaven-shaking hammer. In the time it took to finish a cup of tea, it was able to kill a few dozen golden core cultivators and even a dozen immortal soldiers. However, the more he killed, the paler Shu Tingzi's face became. There was even extreme fear in his eyes. Occasionally, he would look at the sky as if he was afraid of attracting the attention of the star monarch guarding the Imperial array. When he looked at the cliff, there was even more fog and light. He didn't know how many nascent soul cultivators were still alive, and he didn't know who had obtained the treasure inside the jade box. Seeing that the wind was getting weaker, both the sound of the peeper and the whistle were getting weaker, Shu Tingzi's eyes were filled with joy. He waved his hand and whispered, "Quick, follow me and increase our speed. There should be a result over there." This Imperial array, unfortunately, before Shu Tingzi could finish speaking, he heard a loud whistle and a 3-colored python descended from above his head. At the same time, an unparalleled aura came crashing down like a huge mountain. "Save me!" Shu Tingzi was shocked and let out a heart-wrenching scream. It was as if he had long been afraid of this aura. As Shu Tingzi circulated his spiritual energy, the golden light around him shined brightly. The heaven-shaking hammer turned into a giant hammer and charged at the 3-colored python. As for Xiao Hua, who was still in his hand, he casually tossed him to the side. Boom! The heaven-shaking hammer flew into the air, but before it could even touch the python spear, it was sent flying. However, the strange thing was that Shu Tingzi didn't seem to have any intention of fighting the python spear head-on. Although the heaven-shaking hammer was sent flying and Shu Tingzi's face was pale, his body continued to fly backward. Roar! The python spear was like a dragon. It let out an angry roar and stabbed toward Shu Tingzi's heart even faster than Shu Tingzi's retreat. Under the 3-colored light, Shu Tingzi's face was ashen. He stared at where the python spear came from as if he wanted to see the Star Lord's face clearly. Whoosh! When the python spear was less than 6 feet away from Shu Tingzi, a ray of golden light shot out from the side of the python spear. The golden light shot into the air and a thunderous sound echoed. Then, a miserable scream rang out and the python spear stopped in midair. Xiao Hua, who had been thrown into the air by Shu Tingzi, suddenly jumped up. He reached out and used the universe in the sleeve on a 3-colored python spear. Although the python spear had returned to its original form, it seemed to have a life of its own as it trembled violently. Wails came from the body of the spear, and strands of righteous spirit rushed out like an aura. Even when Xiao Hua's magic power reached out, the Daoist robe fell on the body of the spear, and a thick pillar of Aaron Chi roared with a powerful roar, smashing onto Xiao Hua's universe in the sleeve, wanting to work together with the python spear to destroy Xiao Hua's magic. -13. Chapter 36:12. Unfortunately, no matter how much the python spear struggled, even if the weak wind, thick fog, and icy river above Xiao Hua's head disappeared, revealing a clear sky, the python spear still sadly fell into Xiao Hua's hands and instantly disappear. Only then did another drop of blood fall from the sky. All the golden core cultivators prostrated themselves before this aura. While they trembled with fear, they didn't have any thoughts of fighting back at all. However, they were extremely shocked as well. After seeing Shu Ting's situation, how could they not know that everything had been set up by Xiao Hua? Even them following Shu Tingzi was a move by Xiao Hua to lure the star monarch guarding the formation. The few sharp-eyed cultivators who were the first to fall into this defensive formation saw the might of the tricolored python spear when it killed Xiao Hua. Then, they saw that Xiao Hua was still alive and kicking, as if he was not injured at all. The hope in their hearts rose again. Chempage. A sound that shook the space hundreds of feet in radius fell from the clear sky above everyone's heads. Countless pillars of noble chi descended once again, and everyone's vision darkened. A golden-armored celestial general that was hundreds of feet tall blocked the light that shone into the defensive formation. At the same time, a huge amount of noble chi rushed into the celestial general's left hand, and a huge golden hand slowly appeared in midair. Looking at the celestial general's appearance again, wasn't it one of the 28 star monarchs that had appeared in front of the Yaotai mountain? The aura of this star monarch was like his huge body. Wisps of golden fog flowed out from his golden armor and condensed into huge inscriptions on the armor. Each inscription gave off a powerful aura that was not inferior to the aura of a golden core cultivator. The aura of the inscriptions on the armor gathered together as if it was real, blocking everyone's mouths and noses. The fear of not being able to face an enemy involuntarily rose from the bottom of the hearts of the golden core cultivators. Even Shu Tingzi, who had escaped death and looked lucky, could not help but release his aura to resist with all his might. Woo, 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 woo. Just as the crowd was in fear, a similarly powerful pillar of chi appeared opposite the celestial lord. With a roar, it rushed into a gradually expanding golden body. Waves of golden light emerged from the golden body like the rising sun, and a similarly rising pressure overflowed from the golden body. Wasn't this Xiao Hua's transcendence golden body? Xiao Hua's transcendence golden body appeared and immediately fought against the Star Lord's golden body. A series of violent crackling sounds were produced in the void between the two. In the midst of this explosive sound, the group of Jindan cultivators was blown far away. They actually didn't even have the ability to get close to it. Shu Ting's eyes turned. Seeing that Ruo Feng, Bing He, and the others near Xiao Hua's golden body had disappeared, he hastily flew towards the golden core cultivators, quietly preparing to sneak out with these golden core cultivators. You are very powerful. That star monarch watched Xiao Hua's golden body form and indifferently said. That voice was like a yellow bell that shook the surroundings loudly. However, once you enter Yaotai Mountain, you will not have the opportunity to leave. This old man is Star Monarch Hall's Star Monarch Jing Mushuan. If you become a star general under this old man's tutelage, this old man will not only guarantee your survival, but will also allow you to obtain everything you want. Whatever you need in your cultivation, whether it is cultivation methods or medicinal pills, this old man can give them all to you. Star Monarch Jing Mushuan? Xiao Hua's eyes slightly narrowed. He sneered and said, "You dare use the name of the 28 lunar mansions. You truly are arrogant. If this old man were to become your subordinate, wouldn't this old man's illustrious name be sullied? Since ancient times, Confucianism and Taoism have been different. Since this old man has chosen Taoism, he will not wallow in the mire with Confucianism cultivators like you. Ha, ha! You insignificant Taoism cultivator is the arrogant one. Even if you have touched the threshold of essence energy 5th rank, even if you have a scheme to make this old man fall into your trap, how could you know that this old man was probing you? However, this old man was somewhat careless, not expecting your magic weapon to be this powerful. A moment of carelessness and I fell into your trap, that's all." Jing Mushuan laughed heartily. Pointing his finger at the soaring dragon shears flying above Xiao Hua's head, he said, "This old man likes that you have some abilities, and this old man just happens to have a vacancy for a star general. This is why this old man said these few words to you. Otherwise, this old man could kill you right now. Noisy. This old man has never seen such an arrogant absorption like yours. Don't you think you'll cut your tongue if you talk big?" Xiao Hua was unmoved. "This old man has only used 30% of his abilities, and you are not my opponent. If I use all of my abilities, would you not die on the spot?" "Forget it." Jing Mushuan seemed to have lost his patience. Clenching his hand, a thick and vast pillar of qi condensed into an enormous spear in his hand, this old man knows your intentions. It's a pity that even if you stall for time, those little things cannot possibly break out of the star array. Even you are about to fall into the star array. Woo! Jing Mushuan opened his mouth, and a mouthful of tri-colored true qi rushed into the air like a waterfall. Rumble. The earth quaked and the mountains swayed, and the entire mountain ridge swayed. Immediately, that mountain ridge rumbled, and two enormous dragon figures slowly emerged. And at the cliff between the two mountain ridges, a cloud several hundred zhong in size appeared. A portion of the tri-colored true qi fell into it, immediately drawing the vast amount of vast qi from the void to pour in. That cloud transformed into a tri-colored ball of light that fell into the imperial array. The two dragon figures also roared as they rushed towards this ball of light. Two dragons playing with a pearl? Xiao Hua somewhat understood, and his calm face became gloomy again. This was because, with his tyrannical divine sense, he had already understood that the two dragon figures really surrounded the entire star array in the center. When the dragon figures were hovering around the pearl, it had already driven the entire imperial array. The airflow inside the imperial array was like a knife. The nascent soul cultivators who were previously fighting stopped in horror, trying their best to resist this innate power. As for the nearly 50 gold core cultivators who were lucky enough to survive, they were like dandelions in the wind. They could only roll around, unable to resist. Jing Mushuan did not need to do anything at all. As long as he controlled the huge ball of light to trigger the dragon figures playing with the pearl, all the cultivators would be killed. Eat this old man's staff. Xiao Hua smiled coldly and calmed his heart. He raised the wishful staff with both hands. The staff turned into hundreds of feet in size and smashed towards Jing Mushuan. The staff crossed the sky, and cracks appeared in the void. The whistling sound of the wind rushed into the cracks, and no one could hear it. Jing Mubao's face was full of contempt, but he didn't dare to be careless. The long spear in his hand also didn't dare to be careless. Woo! It let out a strange sound, and also went to meet Xiao Hua. Not only that, when the long spear swayed, a pillar of great spirit as heavy as a mountain, and a great spirit as sharp as a flying sword also appeared around Xiao Hua, rushing toward his golden body. Boom! Bang! The pillar of noble qi hit Xiao Hua's body, and a dark golden crack appeared and a black liquid seeped out of the crack. Jing Mushuan's strength of the 5th level was not just for show. The power of this blow alone could kill a nascent soul cultivator. However, when the noble qi fell on Xiao Hua's golden body, Xiao Hua's wishful staff also smashed on Jing Mushuan's long spear. With a loud bang, not only was the long spear smashed, but Jing Mushuan's arm was also hit by the wishful staff. The newly regenerated left arm was now splashed with blood and flesh. Sigh. Jing Mushuan sucked in a breath of cold air in pain and hurriedly urged his genuine qi. However, seeing the birth of 3-colored genuine qi, his injured arm healed at a speed visible to the naked eye. However, one injury after another made Jing Mushuan's face even paler. I have to say, this old man has underestimated you, Jing Mubao said solemnly. He did not dare to neglect and hurriedly took out a huge strange weapon from his Chenkuan bag. The weapon looked like a long spear, but there was a big hand in front of his head. The hand was holding a thick dagger. Kill. Xiao Hua already had the intention to kill. Without waiting for Jing Mushuan to take the weapon, the wishful staff in his hand stirred up the wind and clouds and struck again. Jing Mushuan was also a good martial artist. He waved his huge weapon and urged the abundant noble qi in the defensive array to fight with Xiao Hua. These two huge golden bodies fought in a chaotic battle. In just half a cup of tea's time, the entire defensive array was disturbed by the two. Even the two dragon forms were not as powerful as the two. However, Xiao Hua was not as calm as Jing Mushuan. He wanted to protect himself and save Shu Tingzi and the others, so he must kill Jing Mushuan. Jing Mushuan was an immortal general of the 5th level. It was easy to defeat him, but how difficult was it to kill him? Also, Jing Mushuan could borrow the power of the defensive array, so the possibility of Xiao Hua killing him was really small. In particular, Jing Mushuan was still fighting with Xiao Hua with ease and did not borrow the power of the defensive array. Xiao Hua waved his staff and knocked Jing Mushuan down half a foot. He squinted at Jing Mushuan's golden body and then looked at the two dragon forms in the distance. Unconsciously, he had a plan in mind. At this time, Xiao Hua did not have his own spiritual treasure that could kill Jing Mushuan in one blow, but he would not test it one by one like before. However, Jing Mubao roared angrily, and a three-colored auspicious cloud appeared under his feet. He waved his strange weapon again, and the Howren Chi swords that could flatten a mountain peak stabbed towards Xiao Hua. A huge roar also came from the hand in front of the weapon. Although Xiao Hua's golden body was cut down and collapsed piece by piece, his face was still as calm as water. The invisible nascent soul controlled by the green-robed Xiao Hua quietly appeared above his head. The Ting Jiao shears, which was flashing with golden light in midair, turned into a huge dragon again and rushed toward Jing Mushuan. That huge dragon swung its tail at Jing Mushuan's back. "Hey! You have some skills." Seeing Xiao Hua multitasking, using his divine thoughts to activate the Teng Jiao shears while fighting him, Jing Mushuan was slightly surprised. Just as this faint surprise appeared, he saw a small gourd appear above Xiao Hua's head. In the blink of an eye, something with a nose and eyes emerged from the mouth of the gourd. Jing Mushuan's mind was in a trance. Oh, not good. Jing Mushuan turned pale with fright and hurriedly patted his head. A three-colored genuine qi rushed into the sky and instantly turned into a majestic Z. -13. Chapter 36:13. This Z was different from Xiao Hua's previous Z. It was dressed like a general, and even the appearance of this Z was somewhat similar to Jing Mubai. 3 Qis unification. Refine the spirit back to the void. As soon as Xiao Hua saw Jing Mubao's tricolored true Qi and Z, he immediately understood. Jing Mubao had not only cultivated the 3 Qis unifying the origin, but he had also refined his mind into the Z, reaching the stage of refining the mind back to the void. Moreover, when this Z appeared, Jing Mubai's absent-minded eyes immediately became clear. Even when the 2 green and red spirit execution yuan light fell on the top of this Z's head, they were stopped by the 3-colored true Qi and could not fall at all. Even so, Jing Mubao, who was lucky enough to escape, was sweating profusely on his back. He was still in a state of shock. As soon as he felt this, a sharp pain came from his back. The soaring dragon shears had taken advantage of his resistance to the spirit-slaying yuan light to cut off a large piece of his back. Damn it! Jing Mubai gritted his teeth. The 3-colored Z above his head waved its hand, and countless inscriptions fell from its hand. Jing Mubai was a military Confucian cultivator. His Z was not only dressed like a general, but also could control the inscriptions with a raise of its hand. It was somewhat similar to the Confucian cultivators of Confucianism. Cha. As the inscriptions in the hands of the Z smashed down, thunderbolts appeared from the clear sky around Xiao Hua, flocking into Xiao Hua's golden body. Boom! The thunderbolts of the Z were really powerful. Not only could it blow down the entire mountain range, but Xiao Hua's golden body also collapsed along with it. However, the thing that made Jing Mushua raise her eyebrows happened again. She saw a green light flashed between Xiao Hua's eyebrows, and one by one, the green seal characters that were even colder than the inscriptions appeared. Then, a spell that sounded like the whispers of the gods resounded in the air. Rumble. Layers of dense lightning appeared and fell on his golden body. Incomparable numbness came out, and the golden body collapsed in an instant. Moreover, the collapse spread rapidly, and there was no way to stop it. What kind of method is this? Has this Yarotai mountain already locked the Dao sect's thunder drawing technique? How can this cultivator use it? Moreover, how could this lightning have anything to do with the strange characters? Jing Mubao was completely dumbfounded. Admittedly, Jing Mubao was stunned by Xiao Hua's means, but his nightmare had just begun. Because under the dark green lightning, he did not know when a layer of 2-colored fire net had sprouted from the bottom of his feet, rolling up from bottom to top. As soon as his golden body touched this fire net, it immediately turned into pure liquid and fell into the air. Damn it! Damn it! Damn it! Jing Mubao roared in succession. It was unknown whether he was scolding Xiao Hua, regretting that he had carelessly lost his weapon, or scolding himself for not even preparing too many imperial weapons and scrolls. While Jing Mubao was cursing, the tricolored Z above his head suddenly flew up. His right hand clenched into a fist, and like a meteor piercing through the sun, he smashed towards Xiao Hua's head with an irresistible imprisoning force. He. Xiao Hua sneered. The green-robed Xiao Hua controlled his invisible nascent soul to immediately fly out from the top of Xiao Hua's head. His two hands hugged the air, and streaks of lightning slowly emerged, preparing to launch a sneak attack halfway. However, just as Xiao Hua's nascent soul flew out, it immediately gave birth to a kind of indescribable warning sign. A vague huge suction force came from the depths of the defensive formation. Although it had not yet come out, it had already locked onto Xiao Hua's nascent soul. The green-robed Xiao Hua shuddered. He did not have time to sneak attack Jing Mubao, and immediately urged his nascent soul to land on top of Xiao Hua's head. When this nascent soul touched Xiao Hua's body, the warning sign immediately disappeared, and the suction force also disappeared. Damn it! What's going on? Xiao Hua turned pale with fright. It was also because of this absent-mindedness that Xiao Hua immediately lost the opportunity. The Z's fist fell down. Xiao Hua looked at the head that he dodged, but it was precisely his left shoulder that collapsed. Rumble. With a series of muffled sounds, Xiao Hua's several hundred zhong golden body could no longer support, and slowly shrunk. Jing Mubao was also not that strong. When the Z just hit Xiao Hua's golden body, Jing Mubao felt his mind become confused again, and the soul-punishing Yuan light once again had a tendency to fall. He hastily withdrew the Z, and then looked at Xiao Hua, who hastily withdrew his golden body, and a trace of a sneer appeared at the corner of his mouth. Then, that Z waved his hand, and a huge ball of light fell in front of him. Those two dragon-shaped figures dragged their long dragon bodies and pounced over. Jing Mubao lowered his head and looked at the fire net that he couldn't extinguish even with his noble qi. He knew that if he didn't kill Xiao Hua, he wouldn't be able to escape. But he saw Jing Mubao grin. The Z above his head waved his hands, and the huge ball of light immediately divided into three under the noble qi that was sharper than the edge of a blade. Among these three balls of light, the one in the Z's hand was bigger, and the other two were smaller. Go! A majestic voice that could shake the entire defensive formation burst out from the Z's mouth. It was more ear-piercing than spring thunder. Two vast noble qi pillars emitted a huge rumbling sound as they penetrated the heaven and earth, and directly rushed into the two small balls of light. At the same time, the Z opened his mouth again, and three colored Jin qi spurted out like a rainbow bridge, which divided into two and fell on top of the balls of light. Roar! The two dragon figures raised their huge heads. Although the dragon heads were blurry, they revealed an indescribable excitement. When the dragon heads opened, a cold and dark aura was emitted from the holes in the dragon heads. The two balls of light that were filled with Jing Mubao's condensed Jin qi fell into the dragon heads. Pa 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 pa. The originally blurry dragon heads, after the three-colored Jin qi fell into their mouths, clearly had some color, like the finishing touch, and this color quickly spread over the dragon body. Roar! The earth shook, and the ice river and the weak wind formation were now crazily surging. Along with the swaying of the two dragon figures, an imposing aura that could suppress everything, along with the entire defensive formation, rushed towards Xiao Hua. Jing Mubao smiled, and his smile was very bright. Although the fire net under his feet had not been extinguished, and although the spirit-slaying light above the head of the Z was still threatening his life, he was not the slightest bit afraid. The momentum of the two dragons playing with a pearl was the final killing move of the defensive formation. While Xiao Hua was scheming against him, he was also scheming against Xiao Hua. Jing Mubao had never seen a Taoist cultivator who could escape from the defensive formation of the two dragons playing with a pearl. In the previous Jade Pavilion gathering, the defensive formation of the two dragons playing with a pearl was enough to catch all the Taoist cultivators in one fell swoop. Who knows what the Palace Master is thinking? Today, he actually opened the 28-star arrays. The strength of this Taoist cultivator is far beyond the 4th level of Yuanli. It would be a pity to kill him. It's better to suppress him and use him for me. Jing Mubao secretly calculated. Unfortunately, there was always an accident. Just as Jing Mubao smiled, he saw a disc spit out from Xiao Hua's mouth. As soon as the disc came out, it suddenly expanded. Layers of golden dragon qi gushed out from the disc, and within this dragon qi, countless images of mountains and rivers emerged. Jing Mubao was stunned. His heart gave birth to a kind of unimaginable feeling. He watched as the whole disc instantly turned into an oval-shaped imperial jade seal in the midst of the dragon qi. A terrifying aura rushed out of the imperial jade seal, causing immortals and mortals to retreat. It rushed towards Xiao Hua's two dragon forms and pressed down. Suppress! Xiao Hua coldly roared. Although his voice was much less dignified than the previous Z, it was still exceptionally clear and incomparably powerful. Following this voice, the two dragon figures trembled violently. The dragon qi of the mountain and river seal descended like a large hand. Regardless of whether it was the dragon head or the dragon pearl, it grabbed them all in one go. You, how can you have the national weapon? You, how can you control the national weapon? How can you control the fate of a country? Jing Mubao shouted in disbelief, and then his Z also trembled like a sieve under the suppression of the dragon qi. A sense of crisis that he had never felt before arose in his heart. Logically speaking, although the mountain and river seal was powerful, it might not be able to suppress him, a Star-Lord of Star-Lord Palace. However, in order to control the imperial formation of the two dragons playing with the pearl, he had fused his genuine qi with the dragon pearls. This way, although it was easy to control the imperial formation, when Xiao Hua suppressed the dragon pearls and dragon figures, his Z was also suppressed. What scared Jing Mubao the most was that the dragon qi above the mountain and river seal had an irresistible force. The spiritual qi of heaven and earth in the two dragon mountains of Yaotai Mountain was far inferior to that of the mountain and river seal. Under the suppression of the mountain and river seal, the dragon pearls and dragon heads had been submerged. His Z also collapsed along with the dragon pearls and was about to be pulled into the mountain and river seal. Jing Mubao suddenly felt that he was at his wit's end. He did not know how to get out of this predicament safely. Go all out. Jing Mubao patted his head, and the tricolored genuine qi gushed out again. The genuine qi madly rushed into his Z, trying to stabilize his Z. Roar! Another clear dragon roar came from the mountain and river seal. At first glance, it sounded like two dragon figures struggling, but Jing Mubao knew that this was not the qi of the mountain range that he had previously controlled, because along with this dragon roar, the suction of the mountain and river seal suddenly increased several times. His Z collapsed with a loud bang, and the spirit punishment vital light took advantage of the situation to fall. Jing Mubao only had time to swing his weapon, and the spirit punishment vital light had already broken through his defense and swept past his huge neck. Puff! Blood soared into the sky, and the whole golden body fell down with a loud bang. Good. Xiao Hua's heart relaxed. He urged the spirit punishment vital light to fall again, preparing to kill Jing Mubao's spirit that had already been refined back to the void. However, before the spirit punishment vital light fell, a terrifying fluctuation came out from Jing Mubao's prostrated golden body. At the same time, the Z under the suppression of the mountain and river seal also sent out the same fluctuation. Not good. Xiao Hua was both regretful and frightened. He knew that he had not been able to completely kill Jing Mubao according to his previous plan. Jing Mubao knew that he could not escape death at the last moment, and did not hesitate to self-detonate his spirit to perish together with Xiao Hua. Although Xiao Hua's cultivation was on par with Jing Mubao's and he had many means, it was impossible for him to stop Jing Mubao's self-detonation at the same level. -13. Chapter 36:14. Xiao Hua hastily put away the sword gourd. Ignoring the soaring dragon shears, he had Dragon Vein Xiao Hua use the mountain and river seal to block the two dragon-shaped tails in front of him. That 5th grade star monarch's self-detonation had already arrived. Rumble. The entire defensive formation shook once again, and all the mountains and rivers within a dozen li turned into nothingness. Wave after wave of qi rushed into the sky, spreading in all directions. Xiao Hua, who was at the center of the qi waves, could no longer resist. His dragon-shaped qi was smashed into fragments, his defensive earth shields were torn apart, and clusters of protective golden light were instantly extinguished. In the end, his golden body was torn into pieces, and the brilliance of Xiao Hua's physical body was extinguished. It was like a fallen leaf drifting in the air with the waves. After the time it took to eat a meal, the entire defensive formation slowly calmed down. Originally, the defensive formation controlled by Jing Mushuan was one of the 28 star formations. It covered an area of several dozen li. As a 5th-grade star monarch, Jing Mushuan's self-detonation was equivalent to a Daoist spirit-severing cultivator. His self-detonation could cover 100 li or even several hundred li. However, in order to kill Xiao Hua, Jing Mushuan specially controlled the range of his self-detonation. Of the entire defensive formation, only the area where Xiao Hua and Jing Mushuan fought turned into nothingness. After a long while, suddenly, an arrogant and shrill laugh came from the ground. "Damn it, I'm actually still alive. This rare treasure is mine. Ha ha ha." Immediately, a black and rough nascent soul cultivator flew up from the ground. His divine sense swept through the entire mountain peak, as if he was looking for the jade box that Jing Mushuan and the other nascent soul cultivators failed to snatch before his death. Just as this cultivator released his divine sense, 5 different divine senses appeared in the mountain range. These 6 divine senses suddenly collided in the air. Then, 5 nascent soul cultivators with tattered Daoist robes rushed into the air from different hiding places. The 6 of them stood still in midair like trapped beasts, their faces still in shock. More than a dozen nascent soul cultivators had fallen into the defensive formation, and only a few of them had been killed in the fierce battle. The others were only injured, but Jing Mu's self-detonation had almost killed all of the nascent soul cultivators who were seriously injured. Although the remaining 6 nascent soul cultivators had managed to escape, it appeared that they had also suffered significant losses. Reverend Yuanqing and Reverend Shangtian each stood at a corner. Their faces also carried the same expression of luck. They had already realized that everything was part of Xiao Hua's plan when Xiao Hua suddenly attacked and killed Jing Mubai. Especially Daoist Yuanqing, who had some understanding of Xiao Hua, immediately understood that the fight between the two would not end well. He made a decision almost instantaneously, giving up on snatching the rare treasure in the jade box and fleeing into the distance as soon as possible, away from the place where the two were fighting. Although Reverend Shangtian was arrogant, he was also alert. He had been paying attention to Reverend Yuanqing, who was hostile to him. When he saw Reverend Yuanqing give up the rare treasure, although he was extremely unwilling, he also fled, as far as possible from Xiao Hua and the others. Even though the 2 of them had reacted early, they were still injured by Jing Mubai's dying strike. After escaping the calamity and coming out again, each of them had different feelings. Daoist Shangtian felt both lucky and ecstatic. It could be said that he had survived a double calamity. He had formed a personal grudge with Xiao Hua. He even considered killing Xiao Hua with the power of wind and thunder after leaving the Imperial Formation or the Jade Pavilion gathering. Now, seeing that Xiao Hua's means were even more powerful than the Star Monarch guarding the formation, Daoist Shangtian shuddered. He really didn't dare to imagine the result if he dealt with Xiao Hua. Who would live and who would die? Fortunately, this guy perished together with the Guardian Star, so I didn't have to worry about it. Ayo, this is Xiao Hua's remains. Just as Reverend Shangtian was rejoicing, his divine sense swept over and suddenly found an abnormally damaged body. This body was covered in a blood-stained Daoist robe, and there was not a single piece of undamaged flesh on the body. Those tightly closed slender eyes, and that deathly pale face without any color of blood, wasn't this Xiao Hua, who had shocked Reverend Shangtian greatly? Not good. This guy is still breathing. As soon as Reverend Shangtian discovered Xiao Hua's corpse, he immediately became frightened and couldn't help but steal glances at the other cultivators. Fortunately, Reverend Yuanqing and the other cultivators were taking pills, and the places where the jade box could be located were all swept by their spiritual sense. Therefore, no one discovered Xiao Hua's corpse. If this guy is allowed to recover, Wouldn't this old man's previous plan be for naught? If this guy is allowed to come back to life, how can this old man still have a share of the rare treasure in the jade box? Moreover, if Reverend Yuanqing knew that Xiao Hua was not dead, wouldn't he immediately save him? The favor of saving a 5th grade essence qi cultivator, I'm afraid he won't be able to repay it in his lifetime. Reverend Shangtian's heart could not help but violently beat. Moreover, Xiao Hua just killed the star monarch guarding the formation. His magic treasure, and his nascent soul, he even took the star monarch guarding the formation. Damn, this is comparable to the rare treasure in the jade box. With this thought, Reverend Shangtian's right hand trembled slightly, and the damaged flying sword in his hand could not help but let out a low sword hum. However, just as Shangtian was tempted, he hesitated again. After all, before this, Xiao Hua had already used a trick to deceive the heavens. As early as when he entered the formation, he pretended to be injured by Jing Muxiao's python spear, luring Jing Muxiao into a trap. Who knew if Xiao Hua was using another trick at this time? However, Xiao Hua's body fluttered down and crashed into a mountain peak. The collapsed mountain peak blocked Xiao Hua's fall. Xiao Hua's body rolled a few times on the mountain peak. His body was covered with a lot of dust. Even the rocks on the mountain peak gradually rolled down and slid off Xiao Hua's body. There were also traces of blood on the rocks after they slid off Xiao Hua's body. Seeing this, Daoist Shangtian immediately understood that Xiao Hua must have fainted. Even the nascent soul in Xiao Hua's body must have been knocked out by Jing Mubai's self-detonation. If he didn't take advantage of this opportunity to kill Xiao Hua, even if Xiao Hua didn't wake up, as long as the nascent soul caught its breath, it would definitely attract Daoist Yuanqing's attention. However, Reverend Shangtian still underestimated the vigilance of Reverend Yuanqing and the other nascent soul cultivators. Although the other 5 were taking pills, the sword hum in Reverend Shangtian's hand caused them to raise their heads. Chempage. Sage Shangtian coldly snorted and swept his gaze across the crowd. The flying sword in his hand moved, and a not-so-brilliant sword light soared into the sky, fiercely stabbing towards the heart of Xiao Hua, who had landed on the cliff in the distance. Everyone was stunned and hurriedly looked in that direction. 2 cultivators raised their hands and were about to release their magic treasures. Everyone thought that Reverend Shangtian had discovered the Imperial Jade Seal and hurriedly attacked. However, when they saw that Reverend Shangtian was attacking Xiao Hua's body with their eyes and spiritual sense, they were stunned. After all, in their hearts, Xiao Hua should have died a long time ago. Reverend Yuanqing was also stunned. The flying halberd was like the magic treasures of the other nascent soul cultivators and stopped in midair. Without the restriction of the defensive formation, a nascent soul cultivator was no different from a fierce tiger with wings. Daoist Shangtian took the initiative to attack, and with Daoist Yuanqing's hesitation, the meteor-like lightning had already pierced Xiao Hua's chest. An indescribable expression appeared on Reverend Yuanqing's face. He pointed his finger and was about to retrieve the halberd. He knew that even if he and Reverend Shangtian attacked together, they wouldn't be able to snatch it away. Rather than offending Reverend Shangtian for no reason, it would be better to wait for an opportunity to escape. Although Reverend Shangtian's expression didn't change, his heart was still clenched. He was afraid that something would happen again. Seeing that Reverend Yuanqing no longer tried to stop him and that the flying sword was about to reach Xiao Hua, Reverend Shangtian's heart dropped. After all, they were so close that even if Xiao Hua was in perfect condition, he would still be seriously injured. He already had the advantage against Xiao Hua. People with ulterior motives will always encounter ghosts. Just as the flying sword was about to pierce Xiao Hua's chest, an iron rod suddenly appeared in front of Xiao Hua. Moreover, the iron rod suddenly expanded and blocked the flying sword with a flick of a finger. Clang! A loud noise rang out, and sparks flew everywhere. The flying sword pierced the iron staff and unexpectedly let out a mournful cry. A cluster of sword light scattered out like cold plum blossoms, falling in defeat in front of Xiao Hua. Ah! Reverend Shangtian was stunned. He was familiar with this iron staff. Wasn't it the same staff that Xiao Hua was holding before? Moreover, at this moment, Shangtian's heart turned to ashes. Deceiving the heavens, 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 deceiving. Seeing that Xiao Hua's face was somewhat dirty and messy, like the eyes of a morning star, Reverend Shangtian hurriedly circulated his magic power. At this moment, a strange golden light flew over from the side. The frightened Reverend Shangtian didn't even have time to defend. The golden light cut through Reverend Shangtian's waist in the blink of an eye, causing blood to spurt out. Reverend Shangtian looked down in disbelief at the blood that was slowly flowing out of his body. Above his head, a bright light flashed and a 6-foot-tall Yuanying appeared. It was holding a small sword in its hand and wearing a small soft armor. As soon as this Yuanying appeared, its body flashed with light. It simply didn't want to face anyone and hid itself in the void. It wanted to teleport away. Xiao Hua's face was as calm as water as he stood up. The sword gourd flew out of the space and covered Daoist Master Shangtian's Yuanying. The green and red spirit-slaying Yuan light rushed out, preparing to cut the weeds and eliminate the root. However, before the spirit-slaying origin light could fly out, a white mist appeared in the sky. Within the mist, an aura that caused all the cultivators to suffocate came from the nascent soul. A majestic pillar of aura descended from the sky and covered the nascent soul. The majestic pillar of aura was so solid that the spirit-slaying origin light couldn't land on the nascent soul. Even the nascent soul, which was originally in a daze, woke up. However, after waking up, the nascent soul was even more afraid because the majestic pillar of aura had dragged it out of the sky. -13. Chapter 36:15. Jiji. Reverend Shangtian's nascent soul let out a mournful cry. The runes on his body flashed chaotically as he struggled with all his might. However, amidst the rumbling of the vast aura, everyone could only see the shock on his nascent soul's face. Soon after, his nascent soul was blasted into the fog by the vast aura and disappeared. Rumble. The sound of thunder rang out again. Xiao Hua's face was gloomy as he used the lightning escape technique to chase after the pillar of boundless qi. Seeing the nascent soul being sucked into the void by the pillar of boundless qi, Xiao Hua hurriedly pointed at the space between his eyebrows and opened his Dharma eye. He saw a crack that was like a crack slowly closing. Then, his eyes were filled with boundless waves. These waves were endless. He didn't know where they came from, nor did he know where they were going. Damn it. Xiao Hua clenched his teeth. After killing Jing Mubao, he ambushed Reverend Shangtian in order to eliminate the danger. He didn't want to leave Yaotai Mountain and be troubled by Fairy Xiongfeng. Who would have thought that in the end, he would fail on the verge of success? This vast aura, what is the meaning of this? Is Reverend Shangtian dead or alive? Xiao Hua closed his magic eye and held his chin. He looked at the sky and the mess below him and began to ponder. Reverend Xiao. A slightly cautious and respectful voice sounded. Xiao Hua looked up and saw that it was Reverend Yuan Qing who was closest to him. At this moment, Reverend Yuan Qing's face was filled with an indescribable awkwardness and bitterness. Xiao Hua had pretended to injure him twice and he had ignored both times. Previously, he had said very well in front of Xiao Hua that they would work together. How could his actions convince Reverend Yuan Qing? The other 4 nascent soul cultivators all stood behind Reverend Yuan Qing. Similarly, their previous arrogance was restrained. Facing a Dao sect senior who had broken the Star Lord Great Formation by himself, they didn't have the qualifications to be arrogant. The most important thing was that the Teng Jiao shears that killed Reverend Shangtian was still floating in the air. No one knew if it would fall on their necks or not. Xiao Hua's face didn't show any anger, nor did he have any intention of scolding them. Instead, he looked at them and said, "The formation has been broken. You all go to the jade box and see if there are any other rare treasures near the mountain range." Yes, this junior understands. Although Daoist Master Yuan Qing's cultivation was not the highest among the 5, he was, after all, familiar with Xiao Hua. He hurriedly bowed and agreed. Then, he discussed with the other 4 in a low voice. In a moment, the 5 of them spread out in 5 different directions, releasing their divine senses to slowly search. Xiao Hua looked at the backs of the 5 people. With a wave of his hand, the Teng Jiao shears appeared in his hand. Looking at the golden half of the Teng Jiao shears, Xiao Hua sighed in his heart. His current strength was comparable to the spirit severing stage, but the magic treasure in his hand was not strong enough. Currently, he could only use the soaring WRM scissors, the ocean overturning seal, the spirit slaying light, and the icefall mirror. Of these 4 magic treasures, only the ocean overturning seal was complete. The other 3 were incomplete. The spirit extermination vital light had yet to be successfully refined, and the soaring dragon scissors and the ice deadly mirror were damaged and incomplete. Although Xiao Hua now had the means to refine spirit treasures, he still couldn't decide which magic treasure to refine into his life source magic treasure. Compared to the damaged soaring dragon scissors and the ice deadly mirror, the ocean overturning seal's power was slightly lacking. It was not even comparable to the wishful staff. However, if he were to refine the soaring dragon scissors and the ice deadly mirror into spirit treasures, Xiao Hua felt that it was inappropriate. It could even be said that it was not worth it. Previously, Xiao Hua's main goal was to refine the 5 elements wishful staff, but after much effort, he discovered that what he was refining was only the heaven leveling staff. Now, he had finally obtained the main material for the refining of the 5 elements wishful heaven cudgel. However, it was a huge task to refine it. It was definitely not something he could complete now. This made Xiao Hua feel as if he was drawing water with a bamboo basket. "It's difficult." Xiao Hua sighed. With a turn of his hand, he put the soaring dragon scissors into the space. Then, with a move of his finger, he took out the sword gourd. Now, the sword gourd was extremely powerful. Even Jing Mulong was buried under the spirit extermination vital light. However, there was another problem with the spirit extermination vital light that was difficult to solve. That was, the sword light was not very sharp. Not to mention Jing Mulong, who was a 5th grade elemental power, even Reverend Xiangtian and Leng Qingge, who were 4th grade elemental power, could withstand it. Of course, Xiao Hua also knew that the extreme magnetic light was the key to refining the spirit extermination vital light, but he couldn't find the extreme magnetic light. How can a spirit treasure be easy to refine? Looking at the sword gourd, Xiao Hua's heart gave birth to a realization. Although this Xiao's magic treasures are not very useful, they are gradually being perfected. When the opportunity comes, this Xiao's spirit treasure will be earth-shattering, right? The ancients often say that haste makes waste. This is probably the case. After putting away the sword gourd, Xiao Hua released his divine sense and looked around at the 5 nascent soul cultivators who were searching for him. Then, he released his soul awareness to search for Shu Ting's location. Compared to Reverend Yuan Qing, Xiao Hua cared more about Shu Tingzi. After all, Shu Tingzi had received Xiao Hua's instructions to use him as bait to lure Jing Mulong out. Xiao Hua would remember this favor. After looking for a moment, Xiao Hua recalled a little, identified a direction, and flew in a certain direction. Then, he released his Buddhist awareness to look around. As he looked, Xiao Hua couldn't help but be moved. Then, his figure flashed and he entered the ground. After a moment, he flew out again. In his hand, he was holding an earth-yellow magic treasure that was several feet in size. This earth-yellow magic treasure was Shu Ting's heaven-shaking hammer. Gently placing the heaven-shaking hammer on the ground, Xiao Hua stretched out his index finger. At the tip of his finger, a similarly earthy yellow light landed on the heaven-shaking hammer like a sharp thorn. The heaven-shaking hammer let out a soft rumble and slowly retracted. It returned to the size of a palm and landed in Xiao Hua's hand. Looking at the ground now, it was a rather tragic sight. Inside, Shu Ting's face was yellow and his eyes were tightly shut. Just as he moved his eyeballs, he opened his eyelids with difficulty. Of the nearly 20 golden core cultivators behind him, only 9 were alive. The other 10 had already turned into broken limbs. Even though these 9 people were still alive, Xiao Hua's Buddha's consciousness had already swept over them. He had already found out that these 9 people were already seriously injured. Not only had their corporeal bodies been damaged, but even their golden cores had also been shattered. If they didn't take the spirit pills as soon as possible, then they would die in less than 2 hours. Daoist Master Xiao. Shu Tingzi opened his eyes and saw that it was Xiao Hua. Joy appeared on his face. He forced a smile and said, "I didn't disappoint you. Millimeter." Xiao Hua nodded. "Fellow Daoist's righteousness is something that I will remember in my heart. Not only did you help me lure out the star monarch guarding the array, you even protected the 9 golden core disciples. Although you were heavily injured, their lives were saved." Shu Tingzi slowly sat up and looked at the 9 golden core cultivators. He sighed and said, "Their lives are saved for now, but they will die sooner or later. I was moved by Daoist Master Xiao and became a good person for once." Xiao Hua said with a smile, "Good people will be rewarded. Fellow Daoist, you didn't care about your own safety and used your natal magic treasure to protect them. How can I let them die?" Shu Tingzi's eyes flashed with surprise. He said anxiously, "Daoist. Daoist Master Xiao, do you have the 9 Revolutions life-extending pill?" Xiao Hua was sweating profusely. He waved his hand and said, "I don't have that kind of spirit item, but I have other medicinal pills." As he spoke, he first handed the heaven-shaking hammer to Shu Tingzi. Then, he took out a few medicinal pills and handed them to him. He said with a smile, "Try this medicinal pill of mine." Shu Tingzi naturally knew that this wasn't the time to be polite. He put away his magic treasure and took out a medicinal pill and put it in his mouth. Shu Tingzi's face was filled with ecstasy as soon as the medicinal pill entered his mouth. He immediately closed his eyes and started to circulate his cultivation. Xiao Hua hurriedly said with a smile, "Fellow Daoist, don't be anxious. There are still 9 golden core disciples who need your help. I have to circulate my cultivation and don't have time to help them. Although they made a blood oath to me, they made a blood oath to Daoist Master Xiao. I'll have to trouble Daoist Master Xiao with their matters." Shu Tingzi still hadn't recovered from his injuries, so how could he care about others? He closed his eyes and circulated his cultivation. When Xiao Hua saw this, he didn't dare to delay any longer. He took out the medicinal pills and fed them to the 9 golden core cultivators one by one. Then, he poured his true essence into the 9 people's mouths to help them dissolve the medicinal effects. Xiao Hua's medicinal pills were very powerful. In less than the time it took to brew a cup of tea, the 9 people woke up at almost the same time. When they saw the smiling Xiao Hua and Shu Tingzi, who was sitting cross-legged at the side, they immediately understood what had happened. They all struggled to get up and kneeled. "No need to be so polite." Xiao Hua hurriedly pressed the 9 people down and said, "You're all heavily injured. It wasn't easy for me to save you with my medicinal pills. If you move any more, my medicinal pills will be wasted. Junior Pan Yu thanks Senior Xiao for his kindness." The golden core cultivator in front looked left and right. An indescribable bitterness appeared on his face as he clasped his hands and said with difficulty. The several gold core cultivators also reported their names one by one and thanked Xiao Hua. Xiao Hua nodded slightly. After pondering for a moment, he said, "Pan Yu, not only are your physical bodies heavily injured, even your golden cores are shattered. Now that you're on Yaotai Mountain, your lives could fall at any time. What do you plan to do?" "This." Pan Yu looked at Shu Tingzi, who had his eyes closed, and said in a low voice, "Junior and the others have already sworn a blood oath to serve Senior Shu Tingzi. Don't worry about me. I can't even take care of myself right now. I'll transfer your blood oath to Daoist Master Xiao." Shu Tingzi didn't open his eyes and said in a low voice, "Besides, I was just following Daoist Master Xiao's orders at that time to lure the Confucian cultivators into a trap." Shu Tingzi's voice was extremely low, but the golden core cultivators heard it clearly. Wasn't that the situation at that time? However, Pan Yu and the others seemed to have never heard of a blood oath being transferred to someone else. They couldn't help but look at each other. Xiao Hua looked at the 9 late-stage golden core cultivators and rolled his eyes. He nodded and said, "Since fellow Daoist Shu Tingzi has the heart, then I can't be careless. If you're willing to serve me loyally, I can naturally protect your lives. As long as I can walk out of Yaotai Mountain, I'll definitely bring you out. Moreover, I can also guarantee your future cultivation, including cultivation methods, medicinal pills, and other things." -13. Chapter 36:16. Thank you, Senior. We are willing to pledge our loyalty to Senior. Pan Yu and the others were overjoyed. Being able to pledge their loyalty to someone as powerful as Xiao Hua naturally brought them many benefits. However, Xiao Hua frowned again and said with difficulty, "But the problem is that even if this old man wants to protect all of you, there are still many defensive formations in the Jade Pavilion gathering. Even if all of you stay close to this old man doesn't have much confidence, Senior." A golden core cultivator saw that Xiao Hua was in a difficult position and said in a low voice, "Senior, don't you have the nation treasure? That thing can be used to suppress cultivators of our generation, so it can naturally contain us. It won't be too late to let us out after Senior leaves the Jade Pavilion conference." In fact, Xiao Hua originally wanted to let them enter his Chenkuan bag or spirit storage bag, but after hearing this golden core cultivator's words, he couldn't help but be overjoyed. He nodded and said, "All right, then I'll have to trouble you all. Daoist Master Xiao." Shu Tingzi opened his eyes and hurriedly called out, "You should also suppress I. Why do I feel like I won't be able to last until the Jade Pavilion conference ends with my injuries?" "That's fine," Xiao Hua said with a smile, "as long as fellow Daoist doesn't worry, I can enter." Shu Tingzi's words were half a joke. After all, once he entered the mountain and river seal, his entire life would be in Xiao Hua's hands. No matter what Xiao Hua did to him, he wouldn't be able to resist. However, when Shu Tingzi heard Xiao Hua's straightforward answer and thought about his impression of Xiao Hua in this short period of time, he couldn't help but be tempted. After Xiao Hua finished speaking with Shu Tingzi, he raised his hand and took out 9 medicinal pills. He handed them to Pan Yu and the others and said, "These are the medicinal pills that I used before. They should be able to help you all condense your golden cores. Take them now, and after I put you all into the mountain and river seal, you can take advantage of this time to cultivate." Condense golden cores. Pan Yu and the others could not believe their ears. They all carefully received the mountain river seal and hurriedly put it into the air. Xiao Hua did not hold back and had Dragon Vein Xiao Hua use the mountain river seal to suppress the 9 people inside. Shu Tingzi was moved. Although Xiao Hua didn't say who refined this pill, Shu Tingzi had never heard of any famous alchemist in the hidden immortal continent who could refine this legendary pill. Even if Xiao Hua didn't know how to refine pills, if Xiao Hua was able to get acquainted with this kind of person, he would definitely be able to gain some benefits if he befriended Xiao Hua. Therefore, without waiting for Xiao Hua to speak, Shu Tingzi took the initiative and said with a smile, "Daoist Master Xiao, there is also I don't forget. Is fellow Daoist really willing?" Xiao Hua smiled meaningfully. "I thought fellow Daoist was just joking." "Sigh, didn't Daoist Master Xiao say it already? Good people have good karma. I just did a good deed. Spiritual Master, you should let I have a good karma, right?" Shu Tingzi blinked his eyes and smiled. When Xiao Hua heard this, he nodded solemnly and said, "Fellow Daoist, don't worry. I won't disappoint you. Many thanks, Daoist Master Xiao." Ever since Shu Tingzi woke up, he had been calling Xiao Hua Daoist Master Xiao instead of fellow Daoist Xiao. Dragon Vein Xiao Hua activated the mountain and river seal. Just as he was about to put Shu Tingzi away, Shu Tingzi suddenly shouted, "Daoist Master Xiao, please wait." "Oh," Xiao Hua said with a smile that wasn't a smile, "Fellow Daoist, are you regretting it?" "No." Shu Tingzi waved his hand. "Previously, inside the defensive formation, I saw 2 strange things. Now that I suddenly remembered, I have to remind Daoist Master." Fellow Daoist, please speak. Xiao Hua was bewildered. After hearing Shu Tingzi talk about the two nascent soul cultivators' nascent souls disappearing after their deaths, he asked again, then, Fellow Daoist, do you know if such strange things happened in the Jade Pavilion gathering? Shu Tingzi shook his head slightly. I don't know. However, from what I know, it doesn't seem to be the case. Of course, it's said that there are many defensive formations in the Jade Pavilion gathering, and every defensive formation is different. Perhaps the defensive formation we fell into is different from the others. I understand. I'll pay attention. Xiao Hua temporarily suppressed his doubts and said, Fellow Daoist, you should go back and cultivate. As he spoke, he activated the mountain and river seal and suppressed Shu Tingzi. After putting everyone away, Xiao Hua looked at the mountain and river seal in his hand and smiled. This mountain and river seal was actually a bit similar to a cosmos bag, but the space inside was much larger. Putting people into a cosmos bag sounded very disgusting, but if it was put into the mountain and river seal, it sounded more comfortable. However, in reality, what was the difference? It wasn't as comfortable as his own space. A nation weapon, a nation weapon, a nation weapon, how interesting. Xiao Hua spun the mountain and river seal in his hand and put it back into his meridians. He looked up at the clear sky and muttered, Damn it, Li wanted me to keep a low profile, but I broke a Celestial Lord's defensive formation as soon as I arrived and even killed a Celestial Lord. How can I keep a low profile in the future? Now that the defensive formation is broken and the Celestial Lord is dead, Kong Hongwu will fly into a rage. I really don't know what methods he'll use to deal with me. It seems that he won't rest until he's dead. It's time for me to change my appearance. On the Jade Mountain, within the Celestial Lord Palace, there was a huge space. Kong Hongwu was standing in the starry sky with his hands behind his back. Behind Kong Hongwu were a boy and a girl. They each held a flute and a sword in their hands as they stood there respectfully. However, the two boys' gazes were different from Kong Hongwu's. Kong Hongwu narrowed his eyes as if he had a card up his sleeve. As for the two boys, they looked at the starry sky below them without blinking, their faces filled with anticipation. The stars in the starry sky were dazzling, and each star flickered with a different brilliance. Aside from the ordinary brilliance, there was also a faint mist. This mist was either like a thin thread or like cotton. It was actually different. However, if one looked carefully, they would be able to see the strangeness of the starry sky. Although there were many formations in the starry sky, they were sparse. It was far from being as dense as the real starry sky. Moreover, there were only a few dozen stars that could be considered dense. The brilliance of these stars linked together, and they were either shaped like a rooster or a black bear. It was very dazzling. If Xiao Hua was here, he would definitely be able to tell that there were exactly 28 stars in these dozens of spots. They were the 28 lunar mansions. There was another special place in the starry sky. Under the starry sky, there was something that looked like a long river. This thing seemed to hold up the entire starry sky. Above the long river, there were layers of purple clouds. Between the layers, there were mountains, ridges, long rivers, streams, and so on. Occasionally, the shadows of cities and farmhouses could be seen. Suddenly, on a star that was not shining brightly, a small light dust fell like a meteor. This light dust fell into the long river under the starry sky. At the same time, a thin white line rushed out from the long river and caught the light dust. When the light dust fell into the long river, it did not cause any splashes. 35. The girl was quick to speak and hurriedly shouted, Palace Master, 35 have already appeared. Kong Hongwu faintly replied. His brows slightly furrowed, as if he was not very happy. The girl's pearl-like eyes turned slightly and she smiled. Palace Master, what is this thing? How come I have not seen it in the previous Jade Pavilion conference? It's really fun. Fun? Kong Hongwu opened his eyes and a smile appeared on his face. He said, in this world, the most beautiful thing is to sit and watch the clouds rise and fall. The most calming thing is to wait for the flowers to bloom and wilt. In this world, the most satisfying thing is to control the life and death of others. The two children were dumbfounded. They looked at each other and did not know what to say. The boy thought for a moment and asked, "Palace Master, when the dragon gate was opened, I saw Huda Daoist rush into the dragon gate. Why did he participate in the Jade Pavilion conference? Did he think that the reward from Palace Master was not enough and came to my Jade Mountain to pick spirit herbs? He is really too greedy." Chimpate. Hearing the mention of Huda Daoist, a layer of anger appeared on Kong Hongwu's face. He slightly nodded and said, "Yes, he is indeed too greedy. Little Yun, remember, people die for wealth and birds die for food. This is an old saying that describes human greed. Since ancient times, who knows how many people have died because of this sentence. Little Huda is not walking the dragon gate, it is a dead end. Don't be greedy in the future." The boy named Little Yun hurriedly bowed and said, "Yes, Palace Master, I will remember. I can get whatever I want in front of Palace Master, I won't be greedy." Kong Hongwu smiled and looked at Little Yun. "You are still young, how can you know how big the temptation of this world is? Do you think those Dao sect cultivators who came to participate in the Jade Pavilion conference don't know the disadvantages of greed? Do you think they didn't say such words in the past? Greed is the biggest enemy in life. Palace Master, look, there is a lot of light dust falling." While speaking, the girl jumped up and clapped her hands, saying, "So beautiful, just like fireworks." Kong Hongwu raised his head and looked. Sure enough, there was a snake-shaped star flashing with extremely brilliant brilliance. Under that brilliance, dozens of light dust fell one after another. Above the long river, there was a rushing filament that pulled these light dust into the river. Kong Hongwu unconsciously showed a satisfied smile on his face. There is also that one. Little Yun was not to be outdone. He also pointed at a tiger-like star and shouted, "And there are more fireworks, more beautiful." Before the little girl could take it out, the starry sky was filled with specks of light dust. There were more and less specks of light dust, and they were exceptionally bright. This caused the corners of Kong Hongwu's mouth to curl up again, and he looked very proud. But when Kong Hongwu slightly lowered his head and was about to squint his eyes, suddenly, at the place where the previous star was, the whole star rushed out a few feet of starlight. Near the star, there was a dragon-shaped star river that fiercely rotated and crashed into the star. -13. Chapter 36:17. Ah! Shangguan Yi ran? Jingmu Xian? Seeing this strange scene, Kong Hongwu was shocked. He hurriedly unfolded his robe, and his eyes flashed with 3 colors of clear light. Hua! There was a sound like falling into water, and the whole Bayan star collapsed. The brilliant starlight instantly dimmed, and as the starlight was annihilated, several light dust fell again. What's going on? Kong Hongwu was inexplicably surprised. This Jingmu Xian star formation was broken by someone. How is this possible? The 4 eyes of the boy and girl rolled around, and there was panic and fear on their faces. Obviously, they knew the seriousness of the matter, so they closed their little mouths tightly and didn't dare to breathe loudly. Kong Hongwu stared at the starry sky formation, as if he was thinking about something. After a long while, he looked up to the sky and laughed, as if he had understood something, and said, "Ha ha ha. Hongmeng old man, you're really good. It seems that you want to make an example of my Star Lord Palace. I really underestimated you. When I saw your subordinates leave, I thought you didn't dare to come to Yaotai Mountain to make trouble, but I didn't expect you to send Xiao Hua to make trouble. Good. I'm not your opponent, but I'll cut off your claws and teeth. I'll let you know the power of my Star Lord Palace." After saying that, Kong Hongwu raised his hand, and the sword in Xiao Yun's hand flew up with a clang, and landed in the starry sky. Kong Hongwu patted his own head, and a puff. 3-colored air columns spurted out, and condensed into a Z in the air. Except for the abnormal skin color, this Z was also dressed in a Confucian robe, and looked like a real person. This Z stretched out his hand, and the sword fell into his hand. Immediately, jumping inscriptions flew out from the sword, and the inscriptions made a clear chanting sound. The chanting sound was full of rhythm, and strands of noble qi, which were as thin as hair but condensed with terrifying power, came out of the void and crashed into the inscriptions. Layers of extraordinary splendor mixed with clouds gushed out from the surface of the inscriptions. In the time it took to eat a meal, the inscriptions on the whole sword rushed into the air, and condensed into the appearance of a golden-armored celestial man. Please. Kong Hongwu lightly opened his mouth and spat out a word. Thousands of rays of light flew out of the Z's mouth and landed on the forehead of the golden-armored celestial man. The rays of light converged and turned into the inscriptions of the sun, moon, and star. Then, the Z waved his hand and pointed the sword at the center of the three inscriptions. The golden-armored celestial man flashed with an intense golden light and rushed into the starry sky. Boom! With a soft sound, the golden-armored celestial man disappeared. At the same time, a blood-red star with a long tail flew out from where the golden-armored celestial man disappeared. On top of the star, there were shadows of the sun and moon that were flashing with different colors of clouds. Xiao Hua retracted his gaze from the horizon and released his Buddhist sense to check the area again. He didn't find anyone alive. Only then did he fly to the place where Reverend Xiangtian was killed. Reverend Xiangtian's corpse had been split into two and looked very bloody. Xiao Hua waved his hand and a samadhi true fire fell and burned the corpse. He then raised his hand and took a few Chenkuan bags. Xiao Hua opened them and looked inside. There were many things inside. Xiao Hua didn't have time to look at them carefully and casually threw them into his space. Daoist Xiongtian's cold plum flying sword was also thrown to the ground. However, this sword was Daoist Xiongtian's life treasure. Since Daoist Xiongtian's nascent soul was holding a small sword, even if Xiao Hua erased the origin soul imprint on it, it wouldn't be of much use. However, Xiao Hua only hesitated for a moment. He raised his hand and the cold plum sword fell into his hand. Without the slightest hesitation, he erased the nascent divinity within it and put it away. A magic treasure painstakingly refined by a nascent soul cultivator could definitely be given to an ordinary core formation disciple. It's here, it's here. At this moment, a cultivator's hoarse voice sounded. Xiao Hua looked up and saw that it was one of the cultivators that Daoist Yuan Qing sent to search for the jade box. Xiao Hua urged his body to fly towards that person. The other four people also stopped searching and flew towards that person's location. When Xiao Hua arrived, that person had already taken out the jade box from the collapsed mountain rocks. This place was already very far from the cliff where the jade box was previously placed. Moreover, the surrounding mountain rocks, debris, and fallen ancient trees were all present. It was really a mess. From time to time, there would be some fog, weak wind, and other things rushing out. If one didn't look carefully, it would really be difficult to find it. That person was slightly thin and his face was pale. When he saw Xiao Hua fly over, he hurriedly handed over the jade box and said with a smile, "Senior Xiao." Xiao Hua glanced at the jade box and said indifferently, "Wait a moment. Let's wait for them to arrive." Yes, that person didn't dare to say anything else. He held the jade box in his hand and stood in the air. Seeing that Daoist Yuan Qing and the others still hadn't arrived, Xiao Hua asked again, "How should I address you, fellow Daoist?" "Senior Xiao, you're too polite. I'm Daoist Jingting." Daoist Jingting was flattered when he heard Xiao Hua call him fellow Daoist. "You found this thing, so it should be yours. However, I need the Imperial Preceptor's lot. If it's the lot of the Imperial Preceptor, then it belongs to me." Xiao Hua said, "However, I'll give you some compensation." "I wouldn't dare." Daoist Jingting said hurriedly, "With Senior's ability, finding this thing is as easy as lifting a finger. It's my honor to be of service to Senior. Even if it's the 3 treasures mentioned by Star-Lord Palace, I'm willing to offer them to Senior." "Oh." Xiao Hua stared blankly for a moment, somewhat puzzled. He rubbed his chin, embarrassed by his own deterrence. Although he was somewhat puzzled when he saw Xiao Hua, Daoist Jingting didn't explain much when he saw Daoist Yuan Qing and the others flying over. He just waited quietly on the side. When Daoist Yuan Qing saw the jade box in Daoist Jingting's hand, a smile immediately appeared on his face. He cupped his hands and said, "Congratulations, Senior." He. Congratulations, congratulations. Xiao Hua nodded slightly. Daoist Yuan Qing took out a few more jade boxes from his bosom and handed them to Xiao Hua, saying, also, these are some spiritual herbs and spiritual objects that Junior found nearby. Senior saved Junior's life. Junior has nothing to repay Senior, so I'll take these as my thanks to Senior. Xiao Hua took a deep look at Daoist Yuan Qing and didn't refuse. He took them with a smile and said, since that's the case, I'll accept these things. Fellow Daoist Yuan Qing, you don't have to keep talking about your so-called kindness. I'll listen to Daoist Xiao's instructions. Daoist Yuan Qing was very happy. After answering respectfully, he stood to the side. Xiao Hua understood, so how could the other 3 nascent soul cultivators not understand? They all took out a few jade boxes from their Chenkuan bags. Who knew if they found them in such a short time? They all handed them to Xiao Hua. Xiao Hua took them one by one without hesitation. He roughly looked at them and sent them into his space. Then, he looked at Daoist Jingting and said, I've always liked to be magnanimous. Although I didn't say it clearly and only asked you to help me find the jade boxes, the things inside the jade boxes. Soon after, Xiao Hua repeated what he had just said to Daoist Master Jingting. Only then did he order Daoist Master Jingting to open the jade box. Inside the jade box, there was a flash of brilliance, and a faint, mighty roar of a beast rushed into the air along with the jade box. Xiao Hua's eyes slightly narrowed, revealing a happy expression. He could already clearly see that under that brilliance, there was a swan wan-shaped imperial jade seal. Congratulations, Daoist Xiao. Daoist Jingting also slightly closed his eyes because of that light, and then he shouted with a happy expression. Ha ha! Seeing that it was the state preceptor's lot that he needed, Xiao Hua didn't hold back. He covered his Daoist robe, and the state preceptor's lot fell into his hand, instantly disappearing. Daoist Yuan Qing and the other 4 nascent soul cultivators also opened their mouths to congratulate him, but the smiles on their faces carried a trace of bitterness. More than 10 nascent soul cultivators risked their lives, and so many of them died. Who would have thought that the jade boxes only contained the state preceptor's lot? How could they not feel wronged? Of course, their congratulations were sincere. After all, the state preceptor's lot wasn't what they wanted, and Xiao Hua taking it wouldn't make them feel pained. Xiao Hua received the state preceptor's lot, and this trip was complete. Then, he asked with a smile, I've already achieved my goal of participating in the Jadestage meeting. I'm not going to go any further. I'll just wait here until the Jadestage meeting is over and leave. Fellow Taoists, if you still have other ideas, feel free to go. Daoist Master Xiao. The somewhat short nascent soul cultivator said regretfully, with your skills, how can you stay here? Not to mention that any one of those 3 treasures is useful to you. Even the spiritual grasses and spiritual items in other places of the Jadestage Mountain are incomparable to other places of the hidden immortal continent. Don't you want to get 1 or 2? Xiao Hua said with a smile that wasn't a smile, if I were to snatch those 3 treasures, wouldn't you all be empty-handed? Those things are useless to me, so I'll leave them for you. The short nascent soul cultivator's face was somewhat embarrassed, and he said in a low voice, since Daoist isn't willing to go forward, then this junior will take his leave first. If Daoist has time in the future, please come to Pingyu Lake. This junior will welcome you with open arms. Okay, you can go. Xiao Hua waved his hand and said to Daoist Master Yuan Qing, Daoist Master Jingting, and the others. However, just as he finished speaking, he immediately thought of something and hurriedly said, oh, don't worry, I just remembered something. I don't know which fellow Daoist can help me. When the short nascent soul cultivator heard this, his face was very happy. He had the same thoughts as the others, they all wanted to follow Xiao Hua. This way, even if they encountered any danger, they could ask Xiao Hua for help. However, they didn't expect that Xiao Hua didn't intend to go forward at all. At this time, hearing Xiao Hua's words, the cultivator hurriedly said, I don't know what Daoist Master wants to do. Oh, it's nothing. I just want to ask you, who knows about the heavenly soul, earthly soul, and mortal essence? Xiao Hua said with a smile. -13. Chapter 36:18. When the short nascent soul cultivator heard this, he couldn't help but stare blankly. Looking at the three people beside him, they all looked confused. He slightly shook his head and said, "I have never heard of it." "Hee, no matter." Xiao Hua smiled and waved his hand. "If you don't know, then don't know." At this moment, Daoist Jingting said calmly, "I know what Daoist Jingting is talking about. Moreover, I also know that there is one in Yaotai Mountain." "Is that so?" Xiao Hua was pleasantly surprised. He looked at Daoist Jingting and said with a smile, "If fellow Daoist can help me, I definitely won't treat you unfairly." Daoist Jingting seemed to have made some decision. He lightly bit his lips and said, "Daoist Jingting and I can be considered to be fated. If Daoist Jingting can obtain that thing, I ask Daoist Jingting to share some with me." "Of course." Xiao Hua agreed without hesitation. There is no need to doubt this. Good Daoist Jingting made a prompt decision. He cupped his hands and said, "If Daoist Jingting is willing, I will take Daoist Jingting there. However, that place is rather dangerous. The other fellow Taoists shouldn't rashly take risks." When the short nascent soul cultivator saw that Daoist Jingting had already said this, he hurriedly bowed and said, "I wish Daoist Jingting success. Farewell." After he finished speaking, he urged his magic power to leave. At this moment, he heard a very distant place, the location of that Yaotai mountain. Rumble. The sound of mountains and tsunamis reverberated through the entire sky. Xiao Hua and the others looked up and saw a blood-red meteor rushing out from the peak of Yaotai Mountain. It went straight to the top of the sky, and then with a large blood-red tail, it rushed from the top of the sky to the other end of the mountain range. As the meteor streaked across, the blood-red color was like a sharp sword cutting open the sky. A long bloody scar appeared in the sky. Not only that, but the sky before the meteor was extremely trembling. A myriad of multicolored lights burst out from the front of the meteor. After the meteor, that long red tail seemed to be overflowing with ripples, expanding the bloody scar to the extreme. The sky was filled with blood-red multicolored lights in an instant. Not only did they cover the clear sky, but they also covered the sun and the moon. That night and blood could be seen with the naked eye rushing towards Xiao Hua and the others from a distance. What is going on?" The short nascent soul cultivator was shocked. His body, which had been flying away, came to a stop as he looked into the distance in shock. Strands of heaven and earth yuan qi, as well as streams of righteous qi, slowly surged into the sky. It was as if blood had fallen into a pool of water. The blood-colored rays of light were descending towards Yaotai Mountain at a speed visible to the naked eye. Rumble. The sound of thunder and claps of thunder seemed to be the only sound in the world, reverberating back and forth. Not only did the blood-colored meteor streak across the horizon, it even cut open the hearts of all the cultivators. An indescribable restlessness, viciousness, and brutality unknowingly diffused out from their hearts. A rare treasure. The short nascent soul cultivator had just stopped and his attention fell on the blood-colored meteor when he saw jade boxes flickering with brilliance and clouds rushing out from all directions. Behind the jade boxes were many cultivators. These cultivators were either activating their magic treasures or using their abilities. They were all extremely excited. Unfortunately, the majority of the jade boxes immediately disappeared into the blood-colored rays of light when they rushed into the air. Only a few landed in the hands of the cultivators. Those who obtained the jade boxes either turned around and flew away or directly rushed forward, disappearing with the other jade boxes. Those who didn't obtain the jade boxes naturally didn't want to fall behind. They immediately rushed into the blood-colored rays of light and disappeared. As for more cultivators, they were hesitant. After all, this blood-colored meteor was an ominous sign. Who knew what was inside the rays of light? However, wherever the meteor passed, the blood-colored scars didn't disappear. The rays of light spread downwards bit by bit without any intention of stopping. Some cultivators who were close to the rays of light didn't even need to move their bodies. Once they came into contact with the rays of light, they immediately disappeared. Seeing this, how could the cultivators not know that Star Lord Palace's intention was to let all the cultivators enter the rays of light? Rather than waiting here to be sucked in by the rays of light, it was better to enter the rays of light now and obtain the rare treasure a step earlier. Thus, even more cultivators flew out from the continuous mountain range and rushed into the rays of light, disappearing without a trace. The short nascent soul cultivator looked at the treasures falling into the rays of light with greed in his eyes. Seeing that there were cultivators rushing into the rays of light, he immediately cupped his hands and said, "Daoist Master Xiao, I'll go first. Please." Xiao Hua nodded. That nascent soul cultivator urged his body and rushed up 100 feet. Once he came into contact with the blood-colored rays of light, he disappeared like the other cultivators. Xiao Hua's divine sense followed. He only felt that the rays of light could isolate divine sense, but he couldn't see anything strange about it. "Fellow Taoists, hurry up and go," Xiao Hua urged, then said to Daoist Master Jingting, "Fellow Daoist Jingting, you can lead the way. From the looks of it, Star Lord Palace wants to drive us to a place. The defensive formation from before might be closed." When Daoist Master Jingting heard this, he immediately understood. He hurriedly nodded and said, "Daoist Master, please follow me." As he said this, Daoist Master Jingting also urged his body and flew towards a place. The other nascent soul cultivators cupped their hands towards Xiao Hua and also rushed into the rays of light somewhat hurriedly. They originally had some intention to go with Xiao Hua, but when they saw that Xiao Hua wanted to break through the formation again and didn't want them to follow, especially when all the rare treasures were sent into the blood-colored rays of light by Star-Lord Palace, all the cultivators on Yarotai Mountain had to enter the rays of light to obtain the rare treasures, so Xiao Hua's role was weakened. Therefore, they also dispelled the idea of advancing and retreating with Xiao Hua. Daoist Master Yuanqing looked at the nascent soul cultivator who flew away, his face unmoved. He calmly said to Xiao Hua, "Daoist Master Xiao, Junior's cultivation is limited. I'm afraid it won't be easy for me to escape from Yarotai Mountain. I can't not follow you. You won't drive me away, right?" "Haha, how is that possible?" Xiao Hua laughed. His body flew up and rushed out after Daoist Master Jingting. He even said, "But if you want to follow us, don't call me senior in the future." Daoist Master Yuanqing laughed. His Daoist robe fluttered as he chased after Xiao Hua. He also said, "Daoist Master Xiao, if you say so, how can I not follow your orders?" The three of them flew towards this place for about the time it took to eat a meal. Just as Xiao Hua thought, the entire Yarotai Mountain was completely covered by the rays of light like volcanic clouds. Under the rays of light, rare treasures and spiritual objects flew out one after another. Not to mention that the defensive formation was gradually closing. Even if it wasn't, who would still stay here when the formation was empty? Zhenren Jingting saw them flying over several mountain ranges, flying and stopping. In the ancient forest, which was more than 100 feet high, they found a sandbar where 3 streams converged. Zhenren Jingting stopped. He turned his head and narrowed his eyes to look at the multicolored light falling from above and behind him. He said, "Zhenren Xiao, this is the place where the elites are. Although the rays of light will activate the defensive formation, it's 90% similar to the records I've obtained." Xiao Hua's divine sense swept out. He saw that the vast qi above the sandbar was mixed with obscure inscriptions that blocked his divine sense. He knew this should be one of the defensive formations of Starlord Hall. He then looked at the lush ancient trees on the left side that blocked the blood-colored rays of light. If Daoist Master Jingting didn't bring him here, he probably wouldn't have found this place. So Xiao Hua said with a smile, "Fellow Daoist Jingting, before I came here, I also asked several fellow Taoists for advice. According to them, this Yarotai gathering is completely different from the previous one. There's nothing to learn from them. I wonder how fellow Daoist got the information about this place." Reverend Jingting looks at Xiao Hua, then looks at Reverend Yuanqing, who is following behind him. He sighs and says, "To tell you the truth, Reverend Xiao, I didn't get this information from anyone else. It was during the last few Yarotai gatherings that I came here by chance and found out." "Oh." Xiao Hua was surprised. Could it be that fellow Daoist Jingting has attended the Yarotai gathering many times? Not to mention Xiao Hua, even Daoist Master Yuanqing looked at Daoist Master Jingting with interest. A bitter smile appeared on Daoist Master Jingting's face. He nodded and said, "I'm not afraid of Daoist Master Xiao's joke. This is the 13th time I have attended the Yarotai gathering." "Ah!" Xiao Hua didn't make a move, but Daoist Master Yuanqing cried out in surprise. However, after being surprised, Daoist Master Yuanqing became somewhat embarrassed. He said with a smile, "Fellow Daoist Jingting, you think too much. This Yarotai gathering is also the 3rd time I've attended. You've only attended a few more times than me. I'm afraid I'm the pot calling the kettle black." Alas! Daoist Master Jingting sighed. His voice was full of bitterness and helplessness. He looked at the sandbar in front of him and said, "Fellow Daoists, please don't laugh at me. Actually, the purpose of this humble Daoist's visit to Yarotai Mountain is not for the treasures mentioned earlier. This humble Daoist is also not interested in the 3 treasures that Star-Lord Palace has taken out. This humble Daoist's purpose is the same as that of Daoist Xiao." "Oh!" Xiao Hua raised his eyes to look at Daoist Master Jingting and asked curiously, "Could it be? Fellow Daoist Jingting has attended the Yarotai gathering 12 times just for the Imperial Preceptor's lot? And 12 times, you actually didn't get it?" Daoist Master Yuanqing was also surprised. After all, it wasn't particularly difficult to get the Imperial Preceptor's lot when one's cultivation had reached the middle nascent soul stage. As long as one's luck wasn't too bad, one could get it by attending the Yarotai gathering once. How could one be like Daoist Master Jingting, who had attended the Yarotai gathering 12 times and still hadn't gotten it? Daoist Master Jingting originally wanted to urge Xiao Hua, but when he saw Xiao Hua looking at him with great interest and seemed to have already released his divine sense, he knew that Xiao Hua was observing the defensive formation in front of him. Thinking of his own decision, he opened his mouth and said, "You're right, Daoist Master Xiao. Since I attended the first Yarotai gathering 400 years ago, I've attended the Yarotai gathering 12 times in the past several hundred years and returned empty-handed. I didn't get the Imperial Preceptor's lot even once. Fellow Daoist Jingting, you really have perseverance." Daoist Master Yuanqing didn't know how to comfort Daoist Master Jingting, so he could only say this in a low voice. "Actually, the first 3 times. I really did want to establish a country and have the ambition to be a country's teacher," Daoist Master Jingting said with a smile, "but by the 4th time, the general who was on good terms with I was already old. Seeing that I couldn't help them establish a country for a long time, his son had already abandoned I and cooperated with others. I also met the fellow Daoist who helped them establish a country. I also met him at the Yarotai gathering. I can't help others, but of course, I can't disturb them. Therefore, the things that happened after that were just me acting in a fit of pique. I actually want to see how many times I can get the Imperial Preceptor's lot." -13. Chapter 36-19. After Xiao Hua's divine sense landed on the defensive formation and carefully observed it for a moment, he unconsciously frowned slightly. This defensive formation was rather strange. It was like a lock covering the sandbar. The 3 streams rushing in from all directions were like keys to the lock. The defensive formation could only be opened by the streams. However, there was a faint strangeness in the streams, which contained a murderous intent. Xiao Hua felt that it was somewhat familiar, but also difficult to grasp. He had no choice but to think more about it. "Fellow Daoist Jingting, how did you enter this place last time?" Xiao Hua seemed to have a plan and asked. Reverend Jingting said without hesitation, "When I participated in the Yarotai assembly for the first time, I had already obtained the Imperial Preceptor's lot on a mountain range not far from here. Unfortunately, before I could put it in my Chenkuan bag, I was discovered by another fellow Daoist. This fellow Daoist was more powerful than me, so I was thrown into that stream. In order to escape that fellow Daoist's pursuit, I used the water escape technique to hide. Who knew that a very inexplicable force would bring me into that sandbar? It's just that. I only entered the sandbar for a very short time. I was only able to see the situation inside before I was brought out. Later on, by chance and coincidence, I found out that inside was the renjing that ordinary Daoist cultivators of my sect talked about. Alas, since I knew this thing was the renjing, I had to come here every time I came here to take a look. However, apart from the first time, this was the only time I could see the surrounding ancient trees. In the past several hundred years, Star-Lord Hall never opened this place. This time, I don't have much time left. Xiao Hua looked at the place that was only a few li away. The edges of the ancient trees were already blurred, as if the blood-red light had swallowed the ancient trees. Moreover, under the cover of the light, all the mountains, forests and streams could no longer be seen. Only the distant Yarotai mountain stood tall like a pillar that reached the sky. Upon seeing this, Reverend Jingting straightened his clothes and bowed to Xiao Hua. Reverend Xiao, in fact, when I obtained the jade box containing the Imperial Preceptor's lot, I had a premonition in my heart that the jade box contained no other treasure but the Imperial Preceptor's lot. Why? Reverend Yuan Qing was somewhat puzzled. If you didn't have a premonition, why did you fight for it? Daoist Jingting said very meaningfully, I naturally fight for the State Preceptor's lot, but if I can't get it, then it's naturally not the State Preceptor's lot. However, Zhenren Xiao killed the Guardian Star and asked us to search for it. The only thing I could find was the Imperial Master's lot. Daoist Master Jingting's words were very awkward, but Daoist Master Yuan Qing also understood a little. Daoist Master Jingting's luck was extremely bad. This was his 13th time participating in the Yarotai assembly. The number of the Imperial Preceptor's lot was pitifully small. This was the first time he was so close to the Imperial Preceptor's lot, but he just happened to encounter the unstoppable Xiao Hua. Even if he could get the Imperial Teacher's lot in his hands, in the end, he would have to give it to Xiao Hua. As Daoist Jingting spoke, his figure didn't get up. Since the heavens let me present the Imperial Preceptor's lot with both hands, then it's also letting me serve Daoist. I hope that Daoist Xiao can guide me when you establish your country in the future. Daoist Yuan Qing's eyebrows twitched as he forced a smile. He glanced at the silent Xiao Hua and said, Fellow Daoist Jingting, I'm afraid this isn't your true reason, is it? Yes, this is a reason, but it's not the most important one. Daoist Jingting didn't quite understand the relationship between Xiao Hua and Daoist Yuan Qing, but seeing that Xiao Hua didn't speak and only Daoist Yuan Qing spoke, he thought Xiao Hua didn't quite believe him. He hurriedly said, The most important thing is that I really don't have confidence in myself. I must rely on a senior with destiny. Daoist Xiao controls the national treasure of Confucian cultivators, so you're definitely a person with great destiny. If I don't rely on Daoist Xiao, who else can I rely on? Daoist Yuan Qing blinked his eyes and said with a smile, So that's how it is. I thought fellow Daoist was as afraid of death as I. Being afraid of death is naturally one of the reasons. Daoist Jingting said with a smile. Xiao Hua looked at Daoist Jingting's bowing appearance and nodded. As early as when fellow Daoist Jingting gave me the jade box, I already promised you that I would take out something of equivalent value to the treasures inside the jade box to exchange with fellow Daoist. Since fellow Daoist wants to use his own future to exchange with me, I naturally feel ashamed to accept it. When Daoist Jingting heard this, his face was filled with ecstasy. He shouted, State Preceptor, please accept this subordinate's bow. Haha, fellow Daoist is too polite. Xiao Hua raised his hand and helped Daoist Jingting up. Since you want to work for me, I will certainly not treat fellow Daoist unfairly. As long as I can give you anything, I will satisfy fellow Daoist. Daoist Yuan Qing's face showed a trace of surprise. He also said with a smile, Congratulations, Daoist Xiao. Congratulations, fellow Daoist Jingting, huh? Xiao Hua was about to raise his head to answer when suddenly his eyebrows rose and he let out a cry of surprise. He immediately waved his hand and grabbed Daoist Yuan Qing and Daoist Jingting out of thin air. Without waiting for the two to speak, he dragged the two of them and rushed to the nearby sandbar. Daoist Jingting and Daoist Yuan Qing were slightly stunned. However, when their divine senses swept over the sandbar, they saw that under the blood-red brilliance, near the upper wind of the second stream, an inexplicable aura rushed out. The originally disorderly inscriptions immediately swarmed up. That aura was like a sharp blade that cut open a flaw in the defensive formation. "There's someone inside," Daoist Jing Ting exclaimed in a low voice and looked at Daoist Yuan Qing. The two of them looked at each other with surprise. The inscriptions were like a fountain, and the noble spirit swarmed out. This noble spirit was like an incomparably sharp flying sword, and it slashed in the air with a whooshing sound. Strands of fine texture appeared in the void, and the white clouds were turned into nothingness by these fine texture. Xiao Hua brought the two of them with him. His whole body flashed with a faint golden light. This golden light also made cracking sounds in the fine lines and shattered into pieces. However, the moment it shattered, the golden light condensed again. "Go!" Xiao Hua landed in the middle of the inscriptions and waved his hand. A ray of brilliance appeared, like a huge fist crashing into the inscriptions. Boom! Thousands of inscriptions were forcibly suppressed. The place where the aura appeared was torn apart by this fist. The aura that rushed out became more and more violent. However, just as the aura rushed out, an ear-piercing beast roar was heard from within the crack. The aura suddenly converged, and even a kind of weakness and helplessness leaked out from the aura. Demonic beast. Xiao Hua was slightly stunned. He made a hand seal to protect himself and the others. As his body crashed into the crack, his divine sense rushed inside. "Oh, this is somewhat interesting." Xiao Hua landed in the defensive formation. His divine sense had already seen the situation inside the formation clearly. His face unconsciously revealed an expression of interest. He saw that this place was several acres in size. 3 streams rushed into the sandbar, dividing the sandbar into 3 parts. And the 3 streams converged at the center of the sandbar. A layer of watery splendor rushed out from the center of the sandbar, covering a part of the sandbar. Moreover, with Xiao Hua's divine sense, he had already sensed the mana fluctuations of this splendor. What was covering a part of the sandbar was actually a Daoist magic array. Looking above the sandbar, the aura that rushed out of the defensive formation came from a demonic beast that was several tens of meters in size. This demonic beast had long ears, blood-red eyes, and a 3-petaled mouth. It was very similar to an ordinary rabbit. However, this demonic beast's fur was brownish-red, and its tail was several tens of meters long. How could a rabbit compare to the bloodthirst in its eyes and the vicious aura on its huge demonic body? Below the demonic beast's body, 2 forelimbs that were like human arms were currently covered in a scarlet ring of fire. This ring of fire burned with flames that were several feet high, roasting the demonic beast's forelimbs black. A pungent smell pervaded the air. Not only that, but above the demonic beast's head, a 3-pronged trident that was more than a foot long was emitting a 3-colored brilliance that firmly covered the demonic beast's head. The demonic beast's thunderous roars could not be heard. In front of the demonic beast, there were several nascent soul cultivators who were flying in a circle in midair. The 3 at the front were forming hand seals and activating their magic treasures. The 4 at the left were holding magic treasures in their hands and coldly looking at a female cultivator wearing dark reddish-purple clothes behind the demonic beast. Xiao Hua brought Daoist Yuan Qing and Daoist Jing Ting into the defensive formation. The 7 of them were immediately alerted. However, when everyone scanned them with their divine senses, they saw that the 3 people activating their magic treasures were not alarmed at all. It was as if they had just seen a passerby. On the other hand, the other 2 people were surprised but also had a trace of ridicule. Xiao Hua also knew these 2 people. Weren't they the 2 cultivators that Xiao Hua had met on the night before he entered Mount Yaotai and participated in the trade fair? One was Daoist Shifan, and the other was Daoist Chu. This was what they meant by enemies are bound to meet. Xiao Hua could clearly see the 2 people's ridicule. His heart was unconsciously moved and he looked towards the formation below him. As for Daoist Jing Ting, as soon as he entered the defensive formation, he was immediately attracted by the rabbit-like demonic beast. His gaze had already fallen on the female cultivator wearing dark reddish-purple clothes. He saw that this tall female cultivator looked to be in her 20s. The purple clothes she wore accentuated her curves. The woman's appearance was elegant and she had an oval face with a small nose that was slightly raised. Her most attractive feature was her pair of eyes. The woman's eyes weren't large and were apricot-shaped. Under her thin eyelids, her flowing gaze was like water ripples. The woman's gaze swept past Xiao Hua and the others. Immediately, a kind of faint sadness emerged in everyone's hearts. This sadness seemed to be a reflection of the female cultivator's unfortunate life, but it also seemed to be a kind of pity for the female cultivator. Because at this moment, the woman's face was pale and flushed. Obviously, she was injured. On top of the woman's head, a simple and unadorned jade pendant emitted a misty brilliance that firmly enveloped the woman. However, this brilliance was as thin as paper. It seemed that any random magic treasure could break through the woman's defensive magic treasure. Aoo. Seeing that another person had rushed into the defensive formation, the demonic beast opened its mouth and roared. Its body struggled with all its might and a kind of dense demonic fog sprayed out from its mouth. However, under the confinement of the trident, that dense fog couldn't reach very far. Even the demonic beast's twisting body overflowed with runes. These runes were like ropes that trapped the demonic beast. -13. Chapter 3620. Oh! Fellow Daoist Jingting, could it be, you know this female cultivator? Xiao Hua withdrew his gaze from the formation and turned to look at Master Daoist Jingting, asking in a low voice. When Master Daoist Jingting heard this, he hastily said, reporting to Master Daoist, I do know this female cultivator. Didn't I tell you before? I've been here many times in the past 400 years, and I've met this female cultivator twice. Her name is Li Jing, and her Daoist name is Fairy Jing. Oh! Xiao Hua looked at Master Daoist Jingting with a smile that wasn't a smile and said, it seems this Fairy Jing has the same idea as fellow Daoist Jingting. It seems so. Master Daoist Jingting looked at Fairy Jing's struggling appearance and sighed, although we didn't have a deep conversation on those 2 occasions, I already sensed it. Before entering Yaotai Mountain this time, I specifically looked for her but didn't see any trace of her. I didn't expect her luck to be better than mine. Master Daoist Yuanqing said in a low voice, Master Daoist Xiao, these 7 cultivators are all mid-nascent soul stage. For that Fairy Jing to be able to confront them, her cultivation isn't low. Right now, the 2 sides are in a deadlock. If Master Daoist wants to help, then we'll immediately take action. Otherwise, we'll head into the formation to look for her. Master Daoist Jingting said with a bitter smile, that Ren Jing can only be obtained one at a time. If Fairy Jing obtains it, I'm afraid we'll have to return empty-handed. When Xiao Hua heard this, he faintly smiled and said with deep meaning, that's right. Since we've already arrived late, it's better to wait and see. Although Xiao Hua's plan was well thought out, Fairy Jing's summon immediately shattered his plans. Seeing Master Daoist Jingting whispering to Xiao Hua and the others, Fairy Jing's eyes rippled like water. She said, Master Daoist Jingting, you've also come? Master Daoist Jingting's expression changed. If it was before, he would definitely fly into a rage. After all, Fairy Jing's words, whether intentional or not, had dragged him into the vortex. But fortunately, his anger only swept away for a moment, and he immediately calmed down. Beside him was Daoist Xiao, who was a 5th grade origin power. Why should he care about the petty thoughts of others? Daoist Jingting was calm and didn't agree. The 7 cultivators surrounding him had a plan in their hearts. Everyone exchanged glances and transmitted a few words. Daoist Shifan and Daoist Chu Feng flew out. Daoist Shifan was still able to cup his hands in salute, but Daoist Chu Feng unexpectedly didn't even need to salute. He opened his mouth and said, Xiao Hua, we've already come here first. The spiritual items here are also things we want. As the proverb says, a gentleman doesn't seize another's good things. I presume that a gentleman like Daoist, who has a graceful bearing, surely won't lower himself to the level of common people like us, right? Hee. Xiao Hua laughed. He laughed so hard that his eyes narrowed. He pointed at Fairy Jing and said, The ancients have a saying that good men don't fight with women. You 7 big men actually besieged a female cultivator. Where are the manners of men? Seeing that Xiao Hua didn't attack, Master Daoist Chu sneered in his heart, but he still said, "Fellow Daoist Xiao is wrong. Didn't you see this demonic beast? Although this woman is a Daoist cultivator, she actually raised demonic beasts and wallowed in evil with the 1,000 demonic Saint Realm demonic beasts. Where is the dignity of a Daoist cultivator? As Daoist cultivators, we naturally have the obligation to help this lost lamb return to the right path." Daoist Yuan Qing and Daoist Jing Ting were very astonished. The two of them didn't quite understand the meaning of Master Daoist Chu Feng's words, but seeing that Xiao Hua didn't move, the two of them simply ignored him. Master Daoist Chu Feng saw that Xiao Hua and the others were only standing in the air, and he was pleased with himself. Xiao Hua's gaze swept over the formation and he nodded again. "Fellow Daoist's words are very reasonable. Since that's the case, I won't disturb you guys from upholding justice for our Daoist sect. Farewell." "Yes, fellow Daoist Xiao, please." Master Daoist Chu Feng raised his brows and became even more pleased. He raised his hand and gestured with a somewhat strange tone. Xiao Hua pretended to turn around, but he suddenly opened his mouth again. "That's right, I heard that there's a strange treasure of Starlord Hall here. As the proverb says, treasures have no owner and only the virtuous can obtain them. I'll go take a look. I won't disturb you, will I?" No, fellow Daoist Xiao, please." Master Daoist Chu Feng laughed until his stomach hurt. Beside him, Master Shi Fan also resisted the urge to laugh. They really didn't expect Xiao Hua to leave just like that. Of course, it couldn't be said that they didn't think about it, but they didn't dare to believe it. "All right." Xiao Hua turned around with a smile, but just as his figure moved, he clapped his hand again. A gust of wind whistled and golden light gushed out from the top of his head. It transformed into a palm that was tens of meters long and grabbed at the air. He even said coldly, "Brat, one is a traitor and the other is a strong-willed person. What qualifications do you have to speak to me? Now that everyone is besieging an orphan girl, you actually speak with conviction. If I don't kill you today, when will I?" "Ah!" Master Daoist Chu Feng was really shocked. Although he was on guard before, he gradually let his guard down after seeing Xiao Hua being persuaded. However, he didn't expect Xiao Hua to immediately turn hostile as soon as he turned around. How was this still the pedantic cultivator in his heart? Spiritual Master Shi Fan was also caught off guard. By the time the two of them hurriedly formed hand seals and 2 rays of light rushed into the air to block Xiao Hua, the large hand had already grabbed down. The space within a radius of several hundred feet was controlled by Xiao Hua. The 2 hand seals rushed out like little loaches. They struggled in the air with all their might and were unable to move. Not only that, but when Xiao Hua's large hand grabbed down, the trident that had previously imprisoned the demonic beast immediately lost its brilliance and fell down. The rabbit-like demonic beast raised its head and cried out loudly. A dense demonic aura immediately gushed out and rushed toward the 3 people in front of it. At the same time, there were crackling sounds like beans being fried. One by one, jumping runes fell from the demonic beast's body. "Ah!" Seeing this, Fairy Jing was also stunned. However, the joy in her heart far surpassed the shock. After all, Xiao Hua was standing in front of Master Daoist Jing Ting. She didn't dare to climb up to Xiao Hua and could only probe Master Daoist Jing Ting. Unfortunately, Master Daoist Jing Ting didn't even pay attention to her. Clearly, he was following Xiao Hua's lead. She then looked at Xiao Hua again. Unexpectedly, he was locked in by Master Daoist Chu's words and wanted to leave after a few words. Fortunately, this Fairy Jing wasn't a scheming person. She didn't play any tricks and only used her own magic power to bitterly support herself. But at this critical moment, there was a sudden turn of events and Xiao Hua suddenly attacked. However, the power of Xiao Hua's palm was really too fierce. Fairy Jing pointed at the jade pendant above her head. The jade pendant struggled to emit a brilliance, wanting to attack the somewhat difficult opponent. However, The jade pendant in Xiao Hua's hand seemed to have sunk into a quagmire. Not only was it difficult to send out magic power, but the jade pendant itself was also difficult to move. This Master Daoist Xiao, what is his cultivation? Fairy Jing glanced at Xiao Hua with great fear. Catcher! Several crisp sounds rang out. Not only did the demonic beast break free from its shackles, but the rings on its front claws also fell off. The three attacking cultivators couldn't help but retreat a few dozen feet from the shock. It was also at this time that a fiery voice came from the array not far below them. Which bastard actually dares to break this old man's forbidden technique? Along with the voice, a black dot appeared at the center of the spell formation. The black dot quickly expanded into a vortex and a cultivator wearing black armor charged out from the vortex. A divine sense comparable to a late-stage nascent soul cultivators angrily swept toward them. Behind the black battle armor, several cultivators activated their own magic treasures and followed after him. Not only that, but several popping sounds rang out as tricolored bubbles also appeared on the other two parts of the formation on the sand island. Two bursts of spiritual sense that were no less powerful than the suit of black armor also swept forth from the spots where the bubbles ruptured. One of the divine senses fell on Xiao Hua and paused for a moment. Soon after, a crimson fist flickered with dark flames and smashed towards Xiao Hua without any explanation. As the fist moved, the previously angry cultivator waved his hand. Countless amounts of world yuan qi followed his gesture and condensed into a large hand. This large hand had faint black threads floating within it and whistled towards Xiao Hua. As for the third nascent soul cultivator, he seemed to be somewhat hesitant. However, as the two large hands fell, he could only point with his finger. A cloud flew out of his hand and a foot-long horsetail whisk fell from the sky. Ha ha ha! Xiao Hua laughed. So it's an old acquaintance. Hua de Zhenren, did you not learn your lesson at the banquet? As Xiao Hua spoke, he flew out and activated his Fa Li. His palm, which was originally a feint, immediately changed. It flipped over like it could overturn mountains and seas, then suddenly expanded. It was like a real giant hand that flashed with golden light as it slammed towards Hua de Zhenren's giant hand. Rumble. Xiao Hua's big hand fell down and collided with the other two. The entire sky exploded with a powerful qi wave. The scarlet fist along with the dark flame was completely extinguished by Xiao Hua's attack. That blackened big hand was already imprisoned by Xiao Hua's magic power halfway. Only a faint black thread spread out like a small snake and retreated with extreme vigilance. There was also the horsetail whisk in the cloud. When the cloud was struck down by Xiao Hua, the entire horsetail whisk slightly swayed. Thousands of golden rays of light shattered Xiao Hua's little finger. Damn it! The black-armored cultivator angrily cursed and his expression changed. He slapped his hand and a foot-long iron spike appeared in his hand. He was going to use his magic power in this fierce wind. You dare! Suddenly, Xiao Hua let out an angry roar. The figure that had already landed in front of Daoist Hua de suddenly flashed with lightning and retreated like a bolt of lightning. At the same time, he rubbed his hands together and countless tiny lights fell into the void. Bang, bang, bang. Following the collision of the hands of the three nascent soul cultivators, the sound of air breaking rang in everyone's ears. Rumble, rumble, rumble. Another violent sound rang out and the entire defensive formation shook. However, the center of the shaking was not between the four nascent soul cultivators, but where Xiao Hua just left. -13. Chapter 36-21. Xiao Hua was furious. He hurriedly activated the lightning escape technique and charged toward the center of the explosion at lightning speed. Moreover, countless golden threads flickered in front of him where the lightning had exploded. It was the technique Xiao Hua had activated earlier. However, these golden threads were somewhat disorderly from the impact of the explosion and couldn't fall down for a long time. Only after the most powerful wave of the explosion had subsided did the golden threads disappear. Looking at the sky again, the rabbit-like demonic beast had been blasted hundreds of meters into the air. Its 2 ears were swaying weakly and its scarlet eyes flickered with an expression of lingering fear. Fairy Jing, who was on the demonic beast, was also deathly pale. She looked ahead regretfully. As for the 4 nascent soul cultivators who were attacking Fairy Jing, they had long since flown away. All of them were watching the scene with Schadenfreude. In the air, Daoist Chu Feng and Daoist Shi Fan were surrounded by flickering golden threads. Daoist Chu Feng's face was as white as a sheet of paper. Daoist Shi Fan's eyes were filled with innocence. He wanted to open his mouth to explain, but Xiao Hua was furious and couldn't even open his mouth. As for Daoist Yuan Qing, he was standing hundreds of meters away from the two. Half of his Daoist robe was torn and his face was dark red. His eyes were filled with a look of someone who had just escaped from death. His gaze was still fixed on the place where he had tried his best to escape. There, the unfortunate Daoist Jing Ting had already disappeared. Not to mention a corpse, not even a drop of blood could be seen. No one saw it more clearly than Daoist Yuan Qing. Just as Xiao Hua retracted his hand and fled to attack the 3 late nascent soul cultivators, Daoist Chu Feng, who had escaped from Xiao Hua's imprisonment, suddenly opened his mouth and spat out a several-inch-long rhombus-shaped object. Daoist Yuan Qing immediately felt fear and trepidation as soon as that object appeared. Immediately afterward, a rumbling sound erupted from Xiao Hua's location. Daoist Yuan Qing immediately moved to attack Daoist Chu Feng, but he was still a bit too slow. Daoist Chu Feng frantically shook his hand and half of his arm turned into blood that rushed into the rhombus-shaped object. The object immediately trembled and disappeared before Daoist Yuan Qing's eyes. How could Daoist Yuan Qing not know how powerful this object was? He hurriedly fled. Daoist Jing Ting's cultivation couldn't compare to Daoist Yuan Qing's, and his scheming was even more difficult to compare. Only after Daoist Yuan Qing fled did Daoist Jing Ting come to his senses. By the time he hurriedly brought out the heaven-shaking hammer, the rhombus-shaped object had already appeared in front of his chest. Bang, bang. The sound of air currents was the sound of the rhombus-shaped object breaking through Daoist Jing Ting's protective chi. Then, the rhombus-shaped object exploded loudly and Daoist Jing Ting's corpse was blown to smithereens. Even though Daoist Yuan Qing reacted quickly, he was still injured by this object. Not only was half of his body unable to move, but the chi and blood in his body were constantly surging and difficult to calm down. What is this thing? Why is it so powerful? It can even kill a mid-nascent soul cultivator? Daoist Yuan Qing thought to himself with lingering fear. I'm afraid, it's a destructive magic weapon specially refined by an expert related to Daoist Chu. While Daoist Yuan Qing was pondering, Xiao Hua's figure had already appeared where Daoist Jing Ting was standing just a moment ago. Xiao Hua merely swept over with his divine sense before he had time to look elsewhere. He heard Daoist Huda sneer behind him. You dare. Then, he saw Daoist Huda clap his hands and a fist-sized fire gourd flew into the air. A ferocious aura that seemed capable of destroying heaven and earth rushed out of the gourd's mouth. Damn it! Xiao Hua cursed, unable to restrain his anger. This matter couldn't be considered as his carelessness. He saw that Fairy Jing was able to confront 3 nascent soul cultivators by relying on her demonic beast and magic weapon. He only needed to break the confinement spell on the demonic beast. Then, he had Daoist Yuan Qing and Daoist Jing Ting on his side. 3 nascent soul cultivators and 1 demonic beast dealing with 7 nascent soul cultivators shouldn't be a problem. And when he saw the confinement spell on the demonic beast, he knew that there were definitely other powerful nascent soul cultivators within the array. Therefore, he broke the spell and lured them out. But Xiao Hua didn't expect Daoist Chu to actually have such a powerful magic weapon. This item was similar to the single-use magic weapon Xiao Hua refined when he was still a low-level cultivator. Moreover, this item was 100 times more powerful than Xiao Hua's. In particular, the lamentable Daoist Jing Ting was extremely unlucky. Daoist Yuan Qing was able to dodge it, but Daoist Jing Ting actually didn't react at all and was killed. Perhaps Xiao Hua would avenge Daoist Yuan Qing's death, but Daoist Jing Ting's death was something Xiao Hua must avenge. Xiao Hua simply ignored Daoist Huda's sneak attack from behind. His eyes were burning with anger as he stretched out his hand. A large illusory hand grabbed Daoist Chu and Daoist Shifan. These two were nascent soul cultivators, but under Xiao Hua's fury, they couldn't resist at all. Now, they were like infants in Xiao Hua's hands. The two revealed fear in their eyes. They did their best to open their mouths as if calling for help from Daoist Huada. But before Daoist Huada's magic weapon could fly out, fut, fut, two consecutive sounds rang out. The bodies of the two nascent soul cultivators were crushed into meat paste amidst a burst of light. Save me, save me. Following the bloody light, two 5-foot-long nascent souls clad in armor rushed out from the meat paste. Unfortunately, the two nascent souls were still flashing with golden threads at this time. Xiao Hua's confinement technique didn't only imprison their bodies, it also sealed their nascent souls. Boom! As soon as the two nascent souls came out, they immediately produced a vast chi pillar. Layers of dense fog soared into the sky and wrapped around the nascent souls in Xiao Hua's hand. Humph! Xiao Hua sneered. He opened his already prepared left hand and the sword gourd appeared. The thing with a nose and eyes on the gourd rushed out and immediately nailed Daoist Chu's nascent soul. Swoosh swoosh. The spirit-slaying origin light flew out and turned slightly. Daoist Chu's nascent soul's head didn't fall off, but its eyes lost their spirit and the brilliance around its body was immediately extinguished. Save me, save me. Daoist Shifan's nascent soul hurriedly cried out, Daoist Xiao, this junior didn't, shut up. Xiao Hua roared and pointed at the sword gourd. The spirit-slaying origin light from the sword gourd went past Daoist Shifan and rushed towards Daoist Huada. However, a scarlet flame also flew out from Daoist Huada's fire gourd and pierced towards Xiao Hua with incomparable speed. Crackle crackle. There was another violent explosion. Hundreds of sparks splashed out from the spirit-slaying origin light and the scarlet flame. Circles of ripples rippled through the air. The group of cultivators who were originally standing behind Daoist Huada were greatly shocked and hurriedly retreated. Humph! Xiao Hua snorted coldly. He looked at Daoist Shifan in his hands and said coldly, Daoist Chu is domineering and you actually fanned the flames. If he doesn't have the Tao in his heart, how can you have the Tao? Although I didn't have the intention to kill you before, I can't do anything about your repeated provocations. I had no choice but to take action. As for you, losing your physical body is also a punishment. I won't let my hands be stained with blood again. Many thanks Daoist, many thanks Daoist. Daoist Shifan's nascent soul's sharp voice was filled with pleasant surprise. However, when Xiao Hua loosened his hand and put away the Chenkuan pouch in his hands, a huge suction force with an overwhelming aura pressed down. Daoist Shifan's nascent soul was simply unable to control his body and fell down along with the mist. Daoist, save me. Daoist Shifan's nascent soul turned pale with fright and hurriedly cried out. Unfortunately, just as his voice sounded, Xiao Hua's illusory hand collapsed. Even someone as strong as Xiao Hua couldn't resist under the intentional arrangement of Star-Lord Hall. Xiao Hua looked indifferently at the place where Daoist Shifan slowly disappeared and shook his head slightly. It's not that I don't want to save you, it's because I'm powerless to save you. With that, Xiao Hua raised his head and looked at Daoist Huada with a gaze like lightning. He smiled and said, although I'm powerless to save you, I can send someone to accompany you. Xiao Hua was furious, and he hated Daoist Huada in his heart. He rubbed his hands together, and golden threads entered the void again. Within a radius of 30 meters around Daoist Huada, the strange force suddenly increased, as if several earth-shattering waves were smashing down. Daoist Huada was shocked. He never thought that Xiao Hua would actually have the strength to cast a spell while activating the sword gourd. His heart was in a mess, and the scarlet-red fire threads were already unable to block the soul execution light. Pa like a sword-piercing bamboo, the fire threads collapsed inch by inch, and the soul execution light followed the fire threads and rushed towards Daoist Huada. Fellow Shui Ming, help me. Daoist Huada's face changed as he shouted loudly. The cultivator holding the horsetail whisk beside Daoist Huada was helpless. He raised his hand and was about to wave the horsetail whisk. At this time, Xiao Hua's cold voice sounded, "This Xiao is in a bad mood right now. It's best if you don't make a move. Otherwise, this Xiao can't guarantee that this Xiao won't kill all of you, arrogant." Without waiting for the nascent soul cultivator named Shui Ming to make a move, the black-armored cultivator next to him roared. The small halberd in his hand flew out like a dragon and attacked Xiao Hua. "Fight!" Xiao Hua raised his hand and the seal of turning the sea rushed out of the space. The coiling dragon roared as it urged the seal to fall down like a mountain. Under the bronze brilliance, a terrifying aura condensed. Under this aura, the black-armored cultivator's small halberd no longer had the appearance of a dragon and was pressed down by more than a few feet. "Go!" When the cultivator Shui Ming saw this, his face changed slightly. He didn't dare to be negligent and hurriedly urged the horsetail whisk. But just as the three of them were about to fight, they suddenly heard Fairy Jing cry out involuntarily, "Jing! Fellow Daoist Jing Ting!" Xiao Hua was stunned. He hurriedly scanned with his divine sense and saw a small nascent soul flickering with a faint brilliance at the edge of the formation in the distance. Looking at the nascent soul shaking its head, it seemed to be somewhat unstable. Seeing this scene, Xiao Hua immediately understood. Although Daoist Master Chu's magic treasure had shattered Daoist Jing Ting's physical body, Daoist Jing Ting's luck hadn't declined to the extreme. His nascent soul had actually escaped. It was just that the nascent soul had been knocked unconscious by the huge impact and had just woken up. -13. Chapter 36-22. Xiao Hua was delighted, but he immediately shouted, "Be careful, Daoist Jingting." With that, Xiao Hua ignored the other three late nascent soul stage cultivators and flew towards Daoist Jingting's nascent soul. Moreover, his divine sense displayed the magical power that he had just comprehended from the secret technique of Do Shan Jun's jade pupil. It turned into an invisible big hand that stretched out, wanting to protect Daoist Jingting. Seeing Xiao Hua so easily escape from the battle and treat the three of them as nothing, Daoist Huda couldn't help but bite his lips and his eyes flashed with an ominous glint. "Shua!" Just as Daoist Huda wanted to make a move, thousands of blood-colored rays of light fell from the top of the defensive formation and quickly covered the four cultivators who had previously besieged Fairy Jing. The four cultivators couldn't struggle at all and immediately disappeared into the rays of light. "Forget it." Daoist Huda looked at Xiao Hua's sword gourd floating in the air and the condensed soul-slaying origin light. He smiled coldly and looked at the black-armored cultivator. The two nodded slightly and their figures shot into the sky and also disappeared. Alas! The cultivator Shui Ming seemed to want to wait for a while, but the rays of light hit his face and a huge force that even a late nascent soul stage cultivator couldn't resist came. He couldn't help but rush into the rays of light. Looking at Xiao Hua again, he didn't dare to use his magic power to disturb the defensive formation of Star-Lord Hall. He only dared to use the divine ability he had just comprehended and never used. However, he was still too late. Without waiting for the hand formed by his spiritual sense to fall, a thick fog suddenly rose and a pillar of vast qi came crashing down. Daoist Jingting's nascent soul hadn't woken up yet and was sucked into it in a moment. The nascent soul only had time to scream before it disappeared. Boom! The nascent soul had just disappeared, but the thick fog didn't dissipate. The vast qi pillar seemed to have been hit by a huge fist and broke into two with a boom. After the wind whistled, Xiao Hua's figure appeared there with a very angry and regretful expression on his face. Staring at the place where Daoist Master Jing Ting's nascent soul disappeared, Xiao Hua's brows furrowed tightly. He had already seen this kind of strange situation before, but he didn't notice anything strange at all, so it was impossible for him to see anything strange now. If he had never seen Shen Songzi, perhaps he would be like ordinary cultivators and think that Star-Lord Hall was protecting the Taoist cultivators. He would wait until the Yarotai meeting to find Zhenren Jingting. However, Shen Songzi's Yuanying and the two Yuanying whose primordial spirits were erased reminded him that the Confucian cultivators would not kill the physical bodies of these three Yuanying cultivators for no reason. If the emperor of a country had such an intention, Star-Lord Hall would have even more. Of course, even if this was really a method used by the Star-Lord Hall to protect their nascent souls, Xiao Hua still had to get to the bottom of it. He had to kill the nascent souls of Reverend Chu and Reverend Shangtian. He absolutely couldn't let them escape. Daoist Master. Just as Xiao Hua was pondering, a timid voice came from not far away. It was Fairy Jing who had collected her demon beast and flew over. Yes. Xiao Hua's gaze swept over Fairy Jing. He nodded slightly with an indifferent expression on his face. Fairy Jing reached into her bosom and took out a jade box. She handed it over respectfully and said in a low voice, "This is the Ren Jing I obtained from the Shaozhou's formation. Senior must have come for it. I caused Daoist Jingting's death and also received Daoist Master's help. I have nothing to repay you with." Yes, Xiao Hua declined to comment. He beckoned with his hand and the jade box fell into his hand. Looking at the restrictions and talismans covering the box, Xiao Hua opened his mouth and a beam of sword light fell. All the restrictions were broken. Fairy Jing's heart skipped a beat as she saw this. She secretly rejoiced at her own actions. Contrary to Fairy Jing's expectations, Xiao Hua opened the jade box and saw the so-called Ren Jing inside. An expression of not knowing whether to laugh or cry appeared on his face. He then raised his head and asked, "Li Jing, are you sure this is the Ren Jing of the heavenly soul, earthly soul, and Ren Jing? What? Could it be that this isn't a Ren Jing?" Fairy Jing was also stunned. Looking at the spirit fruit that looked like half a gourd, she asked curiously, "This Ren Jing is thin at the top and thick at the bottom. Isn't it a nurturing essence? If this isn't a Ren Jing, then what is it?" Oh! Hearing Fairy Jing's words, Xiao Hua was slightly absent-minded. It seemed that a long time ago, there was a woman called Xiai Zhuoxia who said to him, "Daoist Xiao, look. That mother-child spirit fruit is thin at the top and thick at the bottom. Isn't it a nurturing infant? That's why it's called mother-child spirit fruit. Daoist Xiao." At this moment, Daoist Master Yuan Qing transmitted his voice from the distant sky. The defensive formation is about to be sealed by Star-Lord Hall. Daoist Xiao should quickly follow this multicolored light out of the defensive formation. Hearing this, Xiao Hua looked up. Sure enough, there was no one else in the sky except for Daoist Master Yuan Qing. The blood-red multicolored light had already filled the sky and was about to approach Daoist Master Yuan Qing. "Daoist Master Yuan Qing, you go first. I'll be right there." Xiao Hua thoughtfully glanced at Daoist Master Yuan Qing. After thinking for a moment, he transmitted his voice again. Daoist Master Yuan Qing naturally knew that Xiao Hua needed this Ren Jing, so he didn't delay any longer. His figure flew up and disappeared into the multicolored light. "Daoist Xiao," Fairy Jing said with a smile, "ever since I saw this item in the Sand Province, I've been looking for ancient records. Finally, I found the source. The records in the ancient records are exactly the same as this item. There should be no mistake. What do you want this item for?" Xiao Hua looked at Fairy Jing with narrowed eyes and asked very abruptly. A trace of sorrow appeared on Fairy Jing's face, but it was instantly washed away by the water-like mist. She said in a low voice, "This is my secret. I hope Daoist Xiao can understand." Millimeter. Xiao Hua nodded and extended his hand. "Give me the jade eye that records how to use this item." This. Fairy Jing was somewhat hesitant, but after a moment of hesitation, she obediently handed over a black cloud eye to Xiao Hua. "I want this black cloud eye. Presumably, you've already made a copy of the records inside." Xiao Hua took the black cloud eye and closed the jade box. He threw it to Fairy Jing and said, "I have no use for this item. You can keep it for yourself." Ah! Fairy Jing was truly overjoyed. She took the jade box with some disbelief. Xiao Hua waved his hand and said, "Don't be in a daze. Hurry up and go. If you're stopped by Daoist Master Huida and the others, you can say that I took the Ren Jing." Many thanks, Daoist Xiao." Fairy Jing was even more delighted. She quickly received the jade box and bowed. Xiao Hua waved his hand and suddenly asked, "Right, what's the name of your demonic beast?" Fairy Jing was taken aback. She didn't dare to hide anything and hastily replied, "Its name is Yinghua." "Oh." Xiao Hua raised his eyebrows. "What a fierce name. No wonder its aura is so fierce." Fairy Jing looked at the light above her head and clapped her hand. She took out a jade slip and gave it to Xiao Hua. She said, "Daoist Xiao, this is where Junior's cave is located. Junior's strength can't compare to Daoist Xiao's, but I'm in charge of a small country close to the coast. There are often cultivators and Confucian scholars hunting the demons that escape from the 1,000-demon sacred realm. If Senior is interested in demonic beasts, Junior will welcome you." "Okay." Xiao Hua smiled and took the jade slip. He waved his sleeve and said, "You should go as well." Yes, Fairy Jing didn't know why Xiao Hua didn't leave, but she didn't dare to ask. She flew into the light. After Fairy Jing left, Xiao Hua said, "Green-robed Daoist, did you notice something?" A voice came from above Xiao Hua's head. It was the formless nascent soul controlled by green-robed Xiao Hua. "Let me tell you, fellow Daoist. When I control our nascent souls and leave our bodies, there will be a faint suction force. It's as if a ferocious tiger is watching us from afar. I can sense it. As long as I control my nascent soul to leave your body, the suction force will reveal its teeth at any time. As fellow Daoist already saw, this suction force isn't something you and I can deal with right now." Green-robed Xiao Hua's voice was a bit distant. He seemed to be thinking about something. "However, although this suction force is powerful, my nascent soul and my body are protected by the power of heaven and earth. This protection is the fundamental reason why the suction force can't appear." Hiss. Xiao Hua sucked in a breath of cold air. He narrowed his eyes and looked at the increasingly diffusing blood-red light. He said in a low voice, "Fellow Daoist, we don't have much time. Do you have any ability to help I rescue Daoist Jingting?" "No." Green-robed Xiao Hua answered decisively, "When I encountered this huge suction force and I saw the abnormality, I already started to investigate the secret technique." According to I's feeling, and I's discussion with fellow Daoist Confucian, I feel that this is a huge defensive formation, but we can't be sure. At the same time, this defensive formation is definitely not something you and I can break with our current cultivation levels. Xiao Hua's eyes flashed with a trace of severity. He said again, "So, this is the work of Star-Lord Hall?" "The problem is," green-robed Xiao Hua sneered, "this Jade Pavilion gathering is the work of Star-Lord Hall. It's only logical that there is a defensive formation that can kill nascent soul cultivators." "That's right." Xiao Hua touched his chin with his hand and nodded slightly. "This is what the secular people say, Juyu beats Huangari, one is willing to beat and the other is willing to suffer." "Juyu? Huangari?" Green-robed Xiao Hua was stunned. "Who is this? Was it written in the books of Confucian cultivators? It's just a ruse of self-injury. There's no gimmick even if it's exposed." Xiao Hua was somewhat impatient. His thoughts turned rapidly. After all, it was his idea to come to the defensive formation in Shoju. Moreover, when he saw that Ren Jing was a mother-child spirit fruit, he was extremely regretful. If he hadn't taken things for granted and didn't ask more questions, he would have known the truth about Ren Jing before entering the defensive formation. Then, Daoist Jingting might not have had to follow him to this defensive formation and Daoist Jingting might not have fallen. Especially since Daoist Jingting had already pledged allegiance to Xiao Hua and placed his future on Xiao Hua. He even entrusted his safety at the Jade Pavilion gathering to Xiao Hua. Moreover, if it weren't for his grudges with Daoist Chu, Daoist Jingting wouldn't have fallen. All kinds of intricate karma made Xiao Hua feel that he couldn't not save Daoist Jingting's nascent soul. 13. You're tuning in to the Celestial War YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories,